So another evergreen video here today concerning American-Israeli geopolitics. So with the Trump peace plan having come out recently, it's a good thing to talk about. People are looking at this little map of Palestine and Israel, talking about how it's not fair or how the impact of Zionism warps American foreign policy decisions from what they otherwise might be. So let's consider what they otherwise might be. To understand American imperial policy, if we understand America as an empire, we have to compare it to its closest cousin in history. That would be the British Empire. And we have to ask, what was the goal of the British Empire in its geostrategy? We can start with the Napoleonic Wars. The basic phrase that you want to memorize here is called balance of power. So Britain, with respect to the continent of Europe, was trying to establish a balance of power. That is, Napoleon was just taking over the whole thing. They didn't want that. They wanted France and Germany and Russia and, well, Germany didn't exist in a traditional sense at that time because the Holy Roman Empire had been taken out, and then you had the Rhine Confederation, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the point of it is Britain wanted multiple powers in Europe so that they could play each power off of each other, and so that Britain could have influence in the continent. Because if Napoleon takes over everything, or Russia takes over everything, or Germany takes over everything, then Britain is sort of shut out of the deal. Whereas if you have these little states, then Britain can cooperate with them, come together with them. So in the case of Napoleon, they're anti-France and they support the Russians. But then later you have the Crimean War, where Russia is threatening to defeat Turkey, to defeat the Ottomans, and to eventually take over Constantinople. And this would lead to a huge expansion of Russian power. So Britain is against Russia in that war. I think that's where we get this poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. I think that's where the Red Cross Association was born. So there's a history of Britain will side with Russia against France, and then they'll side with France against Russia. And then, of course, you get the World Wars come along, where Germany is this nascent power. So they fight against Germany in 2 world wars. So there's this balance of power concept. In every continent, Britain uses this concept. It uses it with respect to India. When the British go into India, they don't want some big, strong, central Indian political force. They want a lot of little divided Indian polities. When they go into China, they don't want to support a strong central Chinese authoritarian government. They want a bunch of little Chinese warlords or something. So this is the British strategy, and it makes sense from a perspective of game theory. It's not something necessarily particular to the British, but I think it's quite pronounced in British imperial history. And I think the United States and America basically follows this tradition. So when we look at Asia, the United States occupies Japan. It occupies South Korea. It has attempted to prevent the rise of power of China in certain ways, although in other ways you could say historically American action has led to the rise of China as a superpower. We could get into that. But at this moment, the state which America seeks to undermine is the Chinese state, and it seeks to support the enemies of China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. In Europe, you've had, in some ways, I suspect at this point, there's been an American support for Brexit in certain ways. That's a controversial and complicated topic in itself. But at the very least, America occupies Germany. America has troops stationed there. America plays Russia off Poland so that it can gain influence in Poland and so on. In South America, the Monroe Doctrine you have there, which is, I mean, you look at South America and it's just an amalgamation of different states who either speak Portuguese as Brazil or Spanish as the rest of them. There's no, from my perspective, and again, this is someone who's never been to South America, but from my perspective, you're all multiracial states who speak Spanish. It's incredible to me that these states, Chile, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Bolivia, it's amazing to me. I don't understand why these states can't simply unite into a union. And the others as well, Panama, Mexico, all of these states, they all speak Spanish. You know, the United States of America, there's a bunch of English-speaking states, 50 different states, and yes, you can say they have their own individual culture, but what's preventing these states from uniting into a single political bloc, since they all pretty much, with the exception of Brazil, they all speak the same language. They're all multiracial. They've all got whites and blacks and so on. So I got to turn that. That's the problem with doing a live stream, is that you mess up your evergreen videos. Anyway, so why doesn't South America unite? Well, I would say it's because of the influence of the CIA and America broadly, keeping these states small and divided so that they can be more easily controlled. And there's been the promotion of chaos in South America. There's been the promotion of the gun trade, of the cartels by the CIA. And so it seems that America, much like Britain, wants to start all these wars all over the place, wants chaos everywhere, wants bloodshed, wants people to be poor because then they can more easily control them. Now, in all these places, I don't think any of this has to do with Israel. The one place where Israel comes to the fore, I forgot to mention Africa, but we have a bunch of wars in Africa too, and it's kind of a similar situation in South America, but you have more ethnic groups and more languages. But anyway, we'll just skip Africa for now. In the Middle East, if Israel didn't exist, if it wasn't there, what would United States policy look like? Well, first of all, we can assume that the country called Israel today would be called Palestine. It would be called Palestine. It would be very similar to Lebanon. It would have a large Christian minority. It would have a large Sunni population. It would have a large Druze population. You know, you'd have people from all over the world making pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So it would be very similar to Lebanon in a lot of ways. It would be one of the most educated states in the Middle East. It would be a pretty impressive, powerful state. Geopolitically, it's on the Mediterranean. But let's just imagine there are no Jews or no Jews of consequence, or just Orthodox Jews, you know, living in their little, what do you call them? Kibbutzim in the land of Palestine, like it was back in the days of the Ottomans. So if this is the case with Israel, Israel's not a geopolitical power. America's not funding Israel because it doesn't exist. There's Palestine there. What does the Middle East look like if you just take Israel out of the equation? Well, it looks like you've got Iran as a nascent superpower, very similar to Germany in Europe prior to the First World War and Second World War. In fact, Iran has already fought a war with Iraq back in the 90s for supremacy over the Middle East. What happened during that war is that you had many different funders, basically the Soviet Union and America, came in to save Iraq. Two superpowers supported Iraq. They also, to an extent, America supported Iran as well to keep that balance of power. But had there been no foreign intervention in the Iran-Iraq war, Iraq would have fallen and Iran would have taken over. So now you've got Iran controls Iraq. And if you're looking at the map that we have below here, the dark green is Shia Islam. White means it's a depopulated area. Light green means Sunni Islam. So this whole dark green territory in Iraq is going to be taken over by Iran. And the dark green territory, by the way, this southern portion of Iraq, south of Kurdistan, west of the desert. I mean, this is the most important part of Iraq. This is where you've got Baghdad. Let's see if we can zoom in on some of the cities here. We've got Basra, which is bordering Kuwait, which has access to the Persian Gulf. We've got Najaf, Karbala, Baghdad. And this area borders these important cities like Samarra, Kadhimain, Ramadi. You've even got some Shia populations up in the Kurdistan region near Kirkuk. Mosul has a Shiite population. So, all of the major cities of Iraq, really, the Sunni area, nobody lives in the Sunni area. And then you've got the Kurdish region, which, by the way, a lot of Kurds live in Iran over here on the other side of the border. So if Iran takes over, if Iran is successful in a war against Iraq, then they have a pretty easy time of conquering much of the important parts of the country and probably making a deal with the Kurds, because Iran already has a pretty peaceful history with the Kurds. Kurds live in Iran quite peacefully. There's not a huge problem there. So they would probably pretty easily absorb the Kurds, or at least create a client Kurdistan state there. And then they would also absorb the Arab Shiites. And really, the rest of the country, this western desert part of the country, they might have some trouble establishing their rule because that's mostly Sunni. But it's mostly depopulated. Not a lot of people live there. So this is what would have happened in the 90s, and this is what could still happen today, because Iran has not been destroyed as a military power. On the other hand, Iraq has been pretty much eviscerated as a military power through the American occupation. Iraq is fractured. Iraq no longer has a strong man like Saddam Hussein. So Iran is threatening at every moment. I mean, pretty much there's an ever-present danger or threat that Iran is going to take over Iraq. Just as a matter of fact, just as the fact that they're two bordering countries with a long history of war. So Iran is going to invade Iraq if there is no counterbalance. Now, down here we have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the main opponent of Iran, because Saudi Arabia, even though they do have some dark green Shia Islam here, most of Saudi Arabia are either Wahhabis or Sunnis. And Wahhabi Salafism is essentially, I suppose, a special kind of Sunni Islam that's like even more loyal to Riyadh and to the monarchy, the Saudi monarchy. But they hate Iran. They hate Iran because they recognize the threat that Iran poses. So what would American foreign policy look like? We're going to, assume that Israel here is Palestine. Let's say Trump came out with a peace deal. He says, you know what? I want a one-state solution with right of return. I think we should rename Israel Palestine and just let Muslims come in there and make it a Muslim majority state, and the Jews can go back to being a minority as they have been for 2,000 years. If Trump came out and said that, and somehow he was able to overcome all of the obstacles in the way of making that happen, what would be the consequence? Well, rather than this Israeli-Palestinian conflict capturing the imaginations of the majority people, the big conflict would be between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And Iran would be trying to invade Iraq, and Saudi Arabia would try to prevent that from happening, as well as some of these other Gulf states, where you can see here, I've zoomed in too much, but you can see here around this Persian Gulf, and maybe I can change the transformation a little better to make this more visible. You can see around this Persian Gulf that we have On this side, Iran. Where's my Iran symbol? We have on this side of the Persian Gulf, Iran. And then if we go down here, we're seeing Dhahran, all around Qatar. This is Shiite area, which is inside of Saudi Arabia. So it's kind of a precarious situation for Saudi Arabia, where if Iran wanted to invade Saudi Arabia, they would use their navy. They would take a land army through Kuwait, and then they would launch a naval amphibious mission, perhaps across the Persian Gulf, and capture this Shiite population here, which is very close to Riyadh, to the capital. Not quite close to Mecca and Medina on the other side of the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, but this is the threat that Iran poses. And this is with or without the Jewish state of Israel. Doesn't matter at the end of the day. It doesn't matter whether Israel exists or doesn't exist with respect to this conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. America understands that Iran, if it controls Iraq, and if it controls Kuwait, and if it launches an invasion of Saudi Arabia, and conquers Bahrain and Qatar, goes along the coast, United Arab Emirates, which has a Shia population, we can see down here. Wish my zooming was a little bit more on point. But as we go down here, Qatar, we're looking near Dubai. Here we have this. Also, the United Arab Emirates, you have to understand, is a totally multicultural, multiracial amalgamation of, like, they've got Indians and Malaysians and Indonesians and all different kinds of people. United Arab Emirates is a majority-minority state, meaning there is no clear majority in the United Arab Emirates. There is no united culture. Their military is a mercenary force, and they just survive on oil money. So these small little states like Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, they can be easily invaded amphibiously, cut off using mining the Straits of Hormuz, mining the Persian Gulf. You can cut off these small little states from international help, and you can invade them through a land route through Kuwait, and you can invade them amphibiously. So these little states, if you add them all up together, this represents a huge amount of oil reserves. All these little states, the reason why they are so rich is because of their rich oil reserves. So you're going to cut through here, and Iran is going to basically control the entire Persian Gulf. So let's check out what Pete is saying. Why supper? I think he means support the Sunnis and not the Shias. Many of these things only make sense with Israel in the picture. Well, that's not true. That's not true, as I've been describing. So Iran, to recap everything we've been saying, if you need to go back and rewatch the video, you're free to do so. Iran has huge influence in Iraq. Iran now has a huge influence alliance with Syria, with the Alawites, with the Christians, with the Shiites living in Syria. They have a huge presence in Lebanon with Hezbollah. They have a huge presence in Palestine with their support for Hamas. So they have control over all these important parts of the Middle East. And as I just said, in the event of a conflict, in the event of a war, in the event of the United States leaving the Middle East, Iran conquers Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. And it conquers part of Saudi Arabia, this part which is Shiite. Man, my zoom function, I just wish it zoomed in where I asked it to. But anyway, this part which is on the Persian Gulf and basically shuts off access to the Persian Gulf of Saudi Arabia. That's significant. That's very important because there's a lot of oil in here. Iran also has this huge support down in Yemen. Okay, why not just align with Iran? Well, you haven't listened to the video then. The initial part of the videos I described how the British Empire turned them into Germany too. Well, can you understand why that's not in the interests of the United States of America to have Germany number 2 in the Middle East? I think you just answered your own question. The United States, like the British Empire, wants to maintain a balance of power. The United States, like the British Empire, does not want a superpower in the Middle East. The United States, like the British Empire, does not want a regional hegemon. The United States, like the British Empire, wants to pursue a divide and conquer strategy. The United States, like the British Empire, wants to have allies that are feeble and weak and dependent upon the United States. It is not in the interest of the United States to ally with a strong, competent power like Iran. If the United States, as you're suggesting, Pete, which is kind of weird, just on a personal level, I don't know what sort of Islam you identify with, but I see a lot of the Twitter sphere, the Dutch Twitter sphere, it mostly seems Sunni, which is maybe ironical here, in that the Sunnis are pro-American here. But if we look at Iran, and I'm going to have a real hard time with people on this, I know it. I know it because I've talked about the issue before. But you've got Iran, and Iran, if you don't have America fighting Iran as we are today, we're killing their generals, we're using proxy forces against them. We're essentially in a war against Iran. We're in a Cold War against Iran. It's a limited war. It's not open total war, but we're fighting Iran. If we switched around, what would happen? Iran would invade Iraq. They would invade Saudi Arabia. They'd invade all these small Gulf states. And the oil reserves, let's check out oil reserves percentage Middle East. Let's see if we can get something going here with some maps. OPEC share of oil reserves. We've got some different, we've got Iran in this. I'll pull this open. This is from OPEC.org. So let's take a look here. Iran has 155 billion barrels of oil, which is 13% of the world. Iraq has 145 billion barrels of oil, which is 12% of the world. Now, if you combine that together, or actually, that's not of the world, it's only OPEC, and the United States is not part of OPEC. So 79.4% of the world's proven oil reserves are located in OPEC member countries, with the bulk of OPEC oil reserves in the Middle East amounting to 64.5% of the OPEC total. So if we multiply, if we add together, let's just add Iran is 13.1 plus 12.2. We get 15.3 or 25.3. And then we have to multiply that by 79.4, which is going to give us the total world oil reserves. Oh, I got to put a point there. My mistake. So, about 20%. If Iran invaded Iraq and seized the oil reserves in Iraq, then Iran would control 20% of the world's oil reserves. Again, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has 22.4. Now, let's see, geographic distribution, oil, Saudi Arabia. Let's see what is the geographic distribution of oil in Saudi Arabia. Oil distribution in the Middle East. Thank you, Pinterest. But I kind of just want the image. All right, so here is the geographic distribution of oil reserves in the Middle East. We have gas and oil here. Where is all the oil? Is it near Mecca and Medina? Is it in the desert? Where is the oil, guys? Let's look at where the oil is. The oil is all around the Persian Gulf and stretching somewhat into Kurdistan, but really it's mostly around Riyadh and the Persian Gulf. So do you understand, if we go back to our picture of our Shiite crescent here, pull this back up. If we look back at the Shiite crescent and then we look at the oil reserves, I got to make sure everything's centered. So if we go back and forth here, and you kind of get a little bit, get a little bit crazy here. What are we seeing match up? The presence of Shiites ranging from Dubai to Kuwait, this coast of the Persian Gulf pretty much perfectly lines up where all the oil is. So when we look at Saudi Arabia, yes, they do have some oil reserves around Riyadh. That's true. But that's pretty close. I mean, if we're looking at the Shiites and the capital Riyadh here, it's not very far away. It's not very far away. It's within striking distance. If Iran invades this coastal part of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh is very close by. It's going to be very difficult. And there's not a lot of natural borders, by the way. There's no mountains, as far as I know. Let's look at mountains, Middle East. Let's take a look at a map of the Middle East with the mountains here, just so we know what we're dealing with on a military level. So here's some of the mountains. Notice all of the mountains are in Turkey, they are in Iran, and they are over to the east there. There are no mountains in Iraq, and these mountains in Saudi Arabia. Let's check the mountains around Riyadh. I want to see the strategic position of Riyadh specifically. So let's look at mountains in Saudi Arabia. I want to see a physical map. I want to see a physical map. Give me a map here. I want a map. So we're looking at these mountains here. Riyadh. So Riyadh is, this is not the highest quality map, but Riyadh is right on the edge of these mountains. So you can see that all this area around the Persian Gulf, it's lowlands. It's very easy to maneuver tanks. Riyadh is right on the border of a mountainous region. So kind of 50-50 there, how defensible Riyadh is from an invasion by Iran. But what we've proven so far, what we've proven very certainly, is that if Iran invaded Saudi Arabia and just the Shiite parts of Saudi Arabia, Iran would control at least 50% of Saudi Arabia's oil reserves. Again, let's assume for a moment that the area around Riyadh, south of Riyadh, is defensible, which is questionable in itself. But let's go back to our calculations concerning the oil here. We said Saudi Arabia had 22.4% of OPEC's oil. So let's say 50% of that times 0.5. So Iran would not only have the 25% within its own country and Iraq, but it would also have this 11.2%. So it would control 28%, almost 29% of the world's oil reserves. What about Kuwait? Add Kuwait in there, 8.5. 8.5 from Kuwait. Now it controls 35% of the oil reserves. United Arab Emirates, 8.2. Let's slap an 8.2 in there. All of a sudden, 42% of the world's oil reserves. Do you see where this is going, guys? If Iran controls 42% of the world's oil reserves, then we've got a big problem, right? We've got a big problem for America. That's an incredible amount of money. If we look at this map here for oil reserves, just showing you on a global scale, of course, America, Canada, Venezuela, Russia all have oil. But if we look at some of these, I want to get into the specifics here. Oil production, this is sort of by region. Again, the Persian Gulf here, very highly concentrated. So we're looking at upwards of 40%, 42%. Is this in America's interest? I'm going to have to be very repetitious in this video because people are not going to get this. Is it in America's interest to have a strong, independent, united, intelligent Iran controlling Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, the Persian Gulf, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Bahrain, as well as having influence in Yemen? Is this a good idea to allow them to have 53% or 43% of the world's oil reserves? Is this a smart idea? Is this going to turn out well for American imperialism? Again, we haven't talked about Israel at all. What is the response? The Saudi Sunnis are the ones funding terrorism and extremist mosques in Europe. Iran doesn't have much against the West except for the fact that we support the Saudis. Well, maybe terrorism and extremist mosques are good for American imperialism. You're conflating American imperial interests with your feels about Western civilization. So that's not an argument. Are the fault lines between Saudis and Iranians deeper than the fault lines between Israel and either of those two? Is it conceivable, or under what circumstances would there be some Arab alliance against others? So the fault lines between the Arabs and the Iranians, well, we shouldn't say Arabs because there's some Arabs who are Shia. But the fault lines between Shia and Sunni are pretty deep. They're pretty deep because you have to understand Shia Islam is a political religion. The same way Wahhabism is a political religion, Shia Islam, basically they worship the political hierarchy of Iran. That's not, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a theocratic state. It's very stable. It's very strong. But that's what it is. And so, it would be like the way in which Mormonism controlled Desereta, and so is a theocratic state. So it is a political, theological entity that Sunni Islam is opposed to because it doesn't want to be subjugated and taken over. And within Turkey, we can look at Turkey, we can look at Afghanistan, have large Shiite populations. Azerbaijan has a huge... Oh, have we even added in Azerbaijan? Is Azerbaijan on this one? No, Azerbaijan is not. But we could even add Azerbaijan. We could say, well, if Iran is expanding out over the world, well, why not just take Azerbaijan too while you're at it? And at that point, I mean, we're talking about a global superpower on the level of Russia. Because when you control, I want to see percentage. Is it going to show me in the Wikipedia? I want to know about Azerbaijan. Is Azerbaijan here? So we have the top 17. And it's going to give us, it's not going to give, I want Azerbaijan percent oil reserve. What's Azerbaijan looking at? It is accounting for 0.4% of the total. Oh, that's not as much as I thought. I thought they had more. They certainly had more back in the Soviet days, back in World War II. But I guess it's not that much with Azerbaijan. But anyway, we're looking at quite a powerful state. What's Russia? Russia oil reserves. Of course, they've got the natural gas as well. They rank 8. They account for 4.8 of the world's total oil reserves. How about natural gas? What do they have for natural gas? Probably a larger. They have 12% of the world's oil exports. It's not telling me about natural gas. How much do they produce? They produce this many billion cubic. Yeah, but I want to know the percentage of the global. Russian natural gas exportation, 80%. Okay, Russia provides 25% of natural gas consumed in the European Union. So, you're looking at a situation in which Iran is going to become a new Russia. Is that in America's imperial interest? No. It doesn't matter whether Israel exists or not. Now, do there exist people who are Zionists, who on a theological or ethnic basis support Israel, regardless of these geopolitical situations? Absolutely, there are Zionists. There are Christian Zionists, there are Jewish Zionists. There are all kinds of Zionists. It's a huge thing. But even in the absence of Zionism, even in the absence of Judaism, even in the absence of Israel, these dynamics would remain as they are. So Zionism and Israel and Judaism sort of fit together with an already existing divide and conquer British imperial strategy that America would pursue in any case, just based on the facts on the ground. But they sort of mesh together, they become confused, and then people say, oh, well, Zionism is the only consideration, when that's just not factually true. And I think we've proven that today. But let's take a look at some of the comments here. See what people are saying. So there was the argument of, well, Saudi Arabia promotes terrorism in Europe. How is that against American imperial strategy? That sounds like a good way to control Europe with terrorism and extremist mosques. Iran doesn't do anything against the West. Well, too bad for Iran. Maybe they should. Maybe then they would get more support in the State Department. Because America, the American imperial strategy integrates terrorism into its model of success. I mean, the FBI is constantly trying to provoke and prod domestic terrorists to act so that they can use that as an excuse to gain more power. Terrorism is not fundamentally a threat to American imperialism. In fact, it helps American imperialism. So the idea that the Saudis are terrorists actually gives more credence to the idea that America would naturally be an ally to the Saudis and against the Iranians. All right, we've talked about that. In many ways, they are more meaningful. The Israelis are tourists there. Hindu Kush oil is useless now that we know about climate change. I'm talking solar wind, hydroelectric. We are going to install solar panels in space with the space elevators. 10 years tops. Ken needs to get in touch with his Faustian spirit and stop thinking so short-term. These aren't short-term trends. This is very long-term. I mean, how long has Islam existed? Islam has existed for what, 1,300 years now? Is that too short-term thinking for you? Turkey is ultra-nationalistic. Caspian Report has 2 very good videos about Turkish geopolitics. They're quite strong. Well, I mean, without watching the Caspian Report, which might be some good arguments there. But let's take a look at Turkey's relation to Iran for a second. Turkey is a part of NATO. That's an important thing to recognize. Turkey is a part of NATO. Turkey, therefore, is allied with the United States, at least nominally. Turkey has had some tense relations with Russia, historically. And in recent history, Turkey shot down a Russian plane. Following the shooting down of that plane, eventually, the Turks have come to foment warmer relations with Russia. So Turkey's relation to Russia is a complicated one. Historically, they tend to be antagonistic. In the last year or two, they seem to have warmed up and formed a closer relationship. Turkey's relationship to Europe is, on the one hand, very hostile, but on the other hand, there is a cooperation there in that they're both part of NATO. Turkey is sending all these migrants into Europe, which you could say is a bad thing. But on the other hand, every time Turkey sends migrants into Europe, it sort of ties Turkey closer together to Europe. Turkey has a very strong relationship with Azerbaijan. Turkey's relationship to Iran is mixed because, I mean, there's a couple of considerations. There is the Israeli-Palestinian, from the perspective of Turkey, there's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict where they probably agree with Iran in some way. on that specific issue. Um, Turkey, is in a sense warming up to Russia, and Russia has a kind of tepid alliance with Iran. So, in that sense, you could say Turkey and Iran are connected. On a broader sense, on a more long term basis, I think Turkey and Iran, there is a certain antagonism between them. I think that Turkey would like to have more control in Syria. I think Turkey would like to have more control in Iraq. I think Turkey's biggest problem is Kurdistan. And I think the Iranian perspective towards the Kurds is different because Kurdish is an Iranic language, meaning that it's part of the Indo-Aryan Iranic language family. So Iran has a much better relationship with the Kurds than Turkey does. So the Kurdish issue is probably the biggest issue in Turkey right now, and I think that's the issue where Turkey is having the most focus and the biggest problems. And so I think that's probably the one of the ways that they would view their conflict with Iran, that Iran is pretty much pro-Kurdish and Turkey is in all capacities anti-Kurdish. So Turkey's relationship to Iran is not necessarily going to be one of friendship. They're two powers. They border one another. They're basically the two competent powers in the Middle East, Iran and Turkey. The Turks are not really the natural allies of the Iranians, but they're going to agree on some issues and disagree on other issues. They're going to maybe cooperate, maybe over the issue of putting pressure on Israel, but then maybe they're going to disagree with respect to, the issue of the Kurds, and maybe they're going to agree that, Russia should have more influence, and they're both going to, it's a complicated issue. With respect to Syria, Iran is supportive of Bashar al-Assad. Turkey has been less than supportive of Bashar al-Assad. Turkey, on the one hand, is allied with America. On the other hand, the Turkish public hates America. Turkey is supposedly in NATO, but Turkey's also warming up to Russia. So Turkey's kind of playing all sides here. Turkey's a wild card. The geopolitics of Turkey are really sort of ambiguous with respect to every issue except for the Kurds. Really, the Kurdish issue is the only issue where the Turks can really focus themselves and come to a clear understanding of what direction they should go in. Everything else, should we be allies with America? Should we be allies with Russia? Should we be allies with Iran? Should we be against Iran? Should we support regime change in Syria? Should we support Bashar al-Assad? Should we support Israel? Should we be against Israel? Turkey, in the last few years, has flip-flopped on all these issues. So Turkey doesn't really have a clear strategy, whereas for Iran, the strategy going forward is very self-evident, and it's been playing itself out for a long time. So, while Turkey is a powerful country, I don't underestimate the power of Turkey. At the same time, Turkey's goals are not quite clear. Other than, I would say, generally, Turkey doesn't want a strong Iran. And also, Turkey wants more influence in Syria. And Turkey wants to solve its Kurdish problem, which, unless you go back to like Armenian genocide tactics, I don't think Turkey is going to solve that problem. So, there's not really necessarily a clear pathway for Turkish success in the Middle East at this point. That could change in the future. We'll see. So we've got the eternal Dane coming to giant windmills. Well, I don't think Danes are famous for their windmills. I think those are the Dutch. I'll still support Giorgiani's Iranian Renaissance efforts. The Iranian Renaissance is a plan to overthrow the government of Iran. That is what the Iranian Renaissance represents. So Giorgiani is connected to the CIA, just so everyone's clear on that. Giorgiani is connected with the United States State Department, just so everyone is clear. Not that I hate the guy. I don't hate the government. I don't hate the FBI. I love the FBI. But just to be clear, that's who Giorgiani is tied to, and his plan is he wants to overthrow the government. And he says, oh, well, we're going to resurrect Zoroastrianism. We're going to I mean, in the same way that Russia is going to support like pagan LARPers in the United States, like in the same way that Russia, it would be in Russia's interest to support like weird pagans in the United States, anti-government people in the United States, libertarians or something. Is libertarianism actually a functional ideology that's going to come to power in any meaningful way? No. But would Russia support that? Yeah, they would disrupt. They would support it as a disruptive ideology. Similarly, the FBI, CIA, State Department support people like Giorgiani because they hope that Giorgiani can help to overthrow the government of Iran, which is a Shiite aristocracy or Shiite theocracy, which has the potential to take over the Persian Gulf. If all of a sudden you had a civil war in Iran over Zoroastrianism or something silly like that, then it would basically destroy Iran and they would split Iran into different states. You would have a Baluchistan over here on the border with Pakistan. You would have this southern Sunni state. You would probably have some Kurdish state that would come out. You would have the different little ethnic groups of Iran would get their own little states here, and it would be a way to carve up, divide, and conquer Iran. So that ultimately, what Giorgiani says on the surface and the effect of what he's saying are kind of two opposing things, which is pretty facile to see. I mean, I don't know, Giorgiani, Dugin, these people, I don't think they're that complicated when you just kind of break down, like, well, what's the effect? If we implemented what you're saying here, what would that look like? What's going on here? It's not very exciting to me. I don't see like, oh, the Faustian idealism of Giorgiani or like the fourth political theory of Dugin. To me, it's just kind of like, okay, so which government is funding you? Oh, okay, so Dugin, you're just a Russian imperialist. Okay, all right. Well, I mean, if that's what we're going for, then I guess you would support that. But that's not me. And Giorgiani is a little more complicated, I guess. Oh, Iran should just take over the Middle East. But first, it has to become a Zoroastrian empire. But first, like, we have to do something that would destroy the state of Iran, destroy the theocratic establishment that has brought Iran to preeminence in the Middle East. We have to just totally destroy that edifice. And then we can have a Zoroastrian empire across the Middle East. So you can call that Faustian idealism, or you can call that, you know, a silly ideology similar to libertarianism that's been invented by the State Department to destroy Iran. Turkey is moving toward Russia lately. Turkey has the ability to shut down the Euphrates, dry up most of the MO. I don't know what MO, when you say, all right, did you mean ME, Middle East? So when you say shut down the Euphrates, you're talking about the Tigris and Euphrates River that originate in Turkey, in the Turkish mountains, in the snow caps of the Turkish mountains, and then pour down into Iraq and then flow into the Persian Gulf. So Turkey has the ability to shut down those rivers in the same way that Israel diverts from the river Jordan. It diverts water from Palestine into Israel. So that is true. Turkey does have the ability to divert waterways from the Euphrates, and Turkey has been moving toward Russia. That doesn't really disprove any of the other things I've been saying, but Turkey is this ambiguous power in the Middle East. What do we make of Turkey? Well, Turkey's caught between two superpowers, Russia and the United States. Which way are they going to go? I don't quite know. But the rest of this analysis concerning Iran and Saudi Arabia, you know, that still remains the truth. Whether Turkey decides to support Iran to a limited extent or whether Turkey decides to oppose Iran in a limited extent doesn't really change the analysis between Saudi Arabia and Iran or the Persian Gulf situation. Turkey is holding Europe hostage. Take him down, Daddy Macron. No, I mean, Turkey's not holding Europe hostage. Turkey is facilitating, you know, the diversification of Europe, which is through high-low versus the middle is good for Macron. It's good for Merkel. The hostage situation is the extent to which maybe Turkey's going a little bit too fast and hard with it and kind of being disruptive with it and causing the rise of these right-wing parties. So you could say that's an internal problem within, again, it's like the Elizabeth Warren, Charlie Kirk dialectic. Both, you're going to get high-low versus the middle with both of them. It's just like, which version do you want there? They have Europe by the balls because of the threat of sending millions of refugees. They already have sent millions of refugees. I mean, I guess they could send millions more, but it wouldn't qualitatively change the situation. Again, it would probably give a poll boost to the right-wing parties, but you look at these right-wing parties, and they're not really transformative parties. They're all Charlie Kirk parties. Salvini wants integration. AfD wants integration. None of these parties are suggesting mass deportations. They're saying, oh, we should limit the extremist position in Europe, the right-wing political parties. Europe is exactly the same as America. There's been a debate for decades now. Who's more right-wing, America or Europe? And at various times, you know, when the BNP was big, Americans would say, oh, I wish we were like Europe. And when the Front National was doing really well, Americans were pining after Europe. And then when Trump won and Brexit got done, you know, the Europeans wanted to be more like the Anglos. And it goes back and forth like this. But the truth is, really, they're both equally right-wing in a sense that there is no, the European extremist right wing says we're going to deport all immigrants, or no, excuse me, take that back. We're going to stop all immigration, not deport all the immigrants. We're going to stop all immigration. We're going to reduce immigration levels to zero. That's impossible given the current system of treaties, the Schengen zone and everything else. It's impossible to accomplish. But they're saying we're going to reduce immigration to 0%. That's the extremist position, not deporting people, not taking a look at the fact that native birth rates are under replacement, immigrant birth rates are above replacement. They don't care about that. They're not going to solve those underlying problems. They're just going to reduce immigration. The moderate position, which is the position of like Front National or AfD or whatever, it's like we should slash immigration by 50% or 60% or 90% or something. So we won't eliminate all immigration, but we'll have merit-based immigration from Vietnam or from China or something. So we'll have a different kind of diversity that's going to more affect the upper middle class rather than the working class. But still, we're going to have diversity. So that you've got the extremist position, the moderate position, and the centrist position is keep immigration where it is. And then the leftist position is we want more immigration. But in no situation are you going to stop demographic change in Europe, because that is the will of the elites. The elites want demographic change because it's going to allow them to better control the populace. So the idea that Turkey is like controlling and manipulating Europe, I think Turkey is a puppet of Europe in a lot of ways. Turkey is facilitating a process that's desired by European elites and really has nothing to do with Turkey at the end of the day. It wasn't originated by Turkey. It wasn't that Turkey was like, aha, we Turks will destroy Europe through, I mean, you'll get Erdogan saying things like that. Like you'll get Gaddafi. You can find Gaddafi quotes where he talks about how Islam is going to take over Europe. So there might be people within Turkey or Libya or whoever think that they're winning and they're controlling the situation. But none of this would happen without the consent of Macron and Merkel and these other people. Their current strategy is establishing a buffer zone in Syria. They will move their Arab refugees there, displacing the Kurds, creating a new loyal population. Okay, well, yeah, that's one way to deal with the Kurds in Syria. But the problem is, what about the Kurds in Turkey itself? I don't know how they're going to solve that problem. Stand Karana, I don't know what Karana is. There is some new deal that international funding will pay for the infrastructure there, though the work will be done by Turkish contractors. Yeah, I've heard about this, that they want to basically create an Arab colony within the Kurdish parts of Syria. I've heard about that. That's certainly part of Turkey's plans. I don't know, it's kind of interesting how I'm saying all this about Iran. I'm basically spelling out, if Israel didn't exist, what would the relationship with Iran be? And I'm showing it would be exactly the same. And maybe because my points are so good that we have to pivot to the topic of Turkey and talk about something tangential and kind of off topic. Is that what's going on? Is anyone actually going to address my points, or are we just going to talk about Turkey? Turkey's a separate video. There is some deal that international, we already read that. I'm already checked out of this type of analysis because I feel no real connection to the US empire. Well, it doesn't matter whether you feel connection or not. This analysis kind of shows you that whether Israel exists or not, America is going to continue to attack Iran and support the Sunnis like the Saudis. So it's just an objective analysis, whether you feel connection to America or not. You could be a Russian and understand this analysis. You could be Chinese. It doesn't matter if you feel connection or not. This is just objectively true. And so the idea that, well, if we just got these Jewish Zionists out of American politics or whatever, if we just ban AIPAC, then we can have friendship with Iran and Georgiani Zoroastrian Empire. That's not what's going to happen because these interests are very entrenched. And they're very logical. And they're not arbitrary. They're not like it's not like chaos for the sake of chaos, but it's chaos for the sake of imperialism. These imperial motivations are very deep. I always low-key cringe when people in the US say we when talking about geopolitics. Go back to eating Cheetos. Yeah, I mean, that's an important idea. Do the American people have a connection to American imperialism? You know, are the people of the United States synonymous with the imperial interests of the United States? And I think there's a case to be made where you say, no, they're not the one and the same. However, when you understand that the American economy is dependent upon the enforcement of a global dollar system, then you understand that actually the American way of life and American living standards are dependent on imperialism. And so, again, my conversation with Faust, I pointed out that if you want to support the collapse of American imperialism, you're essentially supporting the collapse of the American dollar system, which is going to destroy the American economy, which is going to cause huge problems for Americans. I mean, it's going to reduce Americans to poverty and war and starvation and strife. It's going to be pretty bad. Now, you can say you don't care about that if you live in Europe or elsewhere. But if you're in America, you kind of have to realize we're dependent upon this imperial policy. So there is a layer to that there that a lot of people don't understand. There's an awesome interview with Micah Millerman on some Canadian show explaining Dugan. Giorgiani isn't advocating going against the theocratic state anymore. He changed his views for the reason you say. Well, if he changed his views, then he's gone off the reservation. If he's changed his views, he's gone off the reservation. And I'll probably explain that as he was being promised funding by the government. The government basically was in contact with people from the State Department. They said, Giorgiani, we like how you're very subversive against the Iranian government. We want to give you money. And he said, okay, great. I'll just keep spouting what I'm spouting. And then at some point, the promises were cut off. At some point, they stopped talking to him. They basically ghosted him. And if he decided to go off the reservation, if he decided, you know what, the theocratic state is fine, Shia Islam is fine, I'll support that, then he's kind of gone off the reservation. But that doesn't mean that his former views weren't in line with the State Department. Just his new views are a little more pragmatic in support of the Iranian regime. So we'll see. If there was ever a war between Iran and America, depending on what happens to Giorgiani, depending on whether he goes to jail or not, would kind of show whether his views were in line with the State Department or not. Thinking in Dutch, Middle Osten. Oh, okay, Middle Osten. Yeah, that Midden Osten. Turkey, from what I've heard now, has some kind of control of the Libyan situation too. Okay, that's interesting. I've heard somewhat about that the Libyan conflict and so on, the Middle Orient, broke Zoroastrian Renaissance, woke Ottoman revivalism. Well, what are the prospects if we're to do a separate topic on Turkey? Does Turkey have the capacity to take over the Middle East? Well, I mean, again, the United States doesn't want a superpower, so they don't want Iran, and they also don't want Ottoman Turks taking over. They don't want either of those powers. So in either case, if any of them gets too strong, they're going to fight against them. And Turkey recognizes that, and Iran recognizes that. So as long as America's around, there's not going to be any Ottoman Renaissance. But they might try to play off Turkey against Iran as they I mean, everyone understands Saudi Arabia is just totally incompetent. Saudi Arabia can't do anything. So basically, they have to be totally supported and held up by American crutches. So let's see. I wonder if over many generations of global multiculturalism, there'll be a differentiation within the larger herd of this new species of man and what that differentiation would look like. Well, I think in the long term, we're going to see gene editing and artificial intelligence have a huge influence over differentiation of different types of people. It's certainly not going to be an even mix all around. Yeah, the India situation is comparable. Kenneth is the ultimate passer? What does this phrase even mean? I shit test passer. Oh, okay. I thought it was a superlative form of the word, not referring to the tests. Okay, so I'm passing tests. True, geography will still create all kinds of pockets of subspecies. Hello, I'm here due to sleeping difficulties. What's today's thesis? You gotta rewind the video. I agree with you around Iran. I'm just airing my tangential thoughts sometimes because you mentioned Turkey. Economic thinking transfigures everything in terms of money. Right-wing populist parties are no exception. At best, you get a defensive identity, a nebulous term. Jason is Bay. Over financialization of the American economy is perilous, but rich people tend to look at money as worthless for a reason. They have tons of it. Economy needs to be holistic. Look at the Great Depression or 2008 crisis. Giorgiani looks at Iranian dissidents that support foreign attacks on Iran as traitors. Yeah, so if he's I haven't kept up on the changes of opinion. I just remember when he came on the scene and he was advocating that ideology of Zoroastrianism. I was like, you're funded by the State Department. And it turns out there were people in the State Department who were in contact with him, and I think he's admitted that now. And so if he's changed his tune because the State Department ghosted him, then, I guess he is now authentically on the side of the Iranian regime. So we'll see how long he can stay out of jail. I mean, we'll see how long it is until we get into a hot war with Iran here. I don't know. Some people think it's going to be eternal Cold War, and other people think it's around the corner. Zoroastrianism is the past of Iran, but the Iranian future belongs to Satanism. Thus spoke Zarathustra when he returned as the Antichrist. Giorgiani's most recent tweet. You can't be serious. You've got to be joking with me. I don't believe you. Let's see. Twitter. Jason Reza. George. I wonder if he even has a Twitter account anymore. Okay. No way. Is this actually the tweet? The future belongs to Satanism? Are you serious? That is very, that is very weird. That is very strange. Okay, all right, so, okay. I don't know what that means. But that's funny that he actually tweeted that. I thought that was going to be some kind of joke there. I thought that was going to be like Hector was just making things up, but apparently that's a real tweet. Okay. All right, Jason. Jason's going off the reservation. Who knows what's going on with Jason? Jason's, I don't know. Giorgiani has discussed in the past having talks with State Department officials so he could get in with Trump, I guess, neglecting his pro-Zionism for ages. Okay. We're looking at the stream health. This is a pretty decent stream in terms of viewership. People like what's going on. Now let's get into I don't hate Giorgiani, by the way. I'm just trying to be objective about the different beliefs that the guy has espoused. The most recent ones, I can't quite tell you what's going on. But back to the topic of today's video, Intro to American-Israeli Geopolitics. let's talk a little bit about the future of Israel, because what I've done in this video is I've said, what if Israel didn't exist? If Israel didn't exist, we'd pretty much have the same exact Middle East policy, which would be we'd be trying to kill Bashar al-Assad, we'd be supporting Saudi Arabia, we'd be funding the Egyptian military, we'd be funding the Jordanians as, essentially anti-Palestinian regime. We'd be fighting Iran, and pursuant to that, we'd be establishing bases in Afghanistan. We'd be establishing bases in Iraq. We've got, activity going on in Turkmenistan for what it's worth. The State Department, CIA is pretty active in all the STAN countries up there, partially for anti-Russian reasons, but also for anti-Iranian reasons. There's also a huge State Department influence in Azerbaijan. I'm surprised that Baku oil fields only account for 0.4% of global oil production at this point, because they used to be, that used to be like 40% of global oil production back in World War II, or 20%, I don't remember what it was like 40% of Soviet production, and then the other 40% came from the eastern shore of the Caspian Sea. But anyway, I've proven so far that the fact that we're going to war with Iran, at least a Cold War, is not the result of Jews. It's not the result of Israel. It's just the result of the fact that America is like the British Empire, divide and conquer, promotes chaos. It's against regional hegemons, and that's why it's against Iran. If Iran collapsed and Turkey took over, then we'd be anti-Turkish. But essentially, it has nothing to do... There we go again. It has nothing to do with Israel. Although Israel and the Jewish people and Zionism just so happens to coincide with a lot of this, and so it appears like it's the primary reason, but it's not the primary reason. In fact, you could say that Israel was established by the State Department in some ways to allow for, American influence in the Middle East. You could say that it was established in the first place. That maybe Zionism was created not by Jewish people, maybe Zionism was created by Anglos. But that's getting a little bit conspiratorial. I don't think Zionists would appreciate that analysis of their deeply held beliefs. But let's take a look at Zionism. Is Zionism equivalent to Judaism? Just a question to throw out there. Is George Soros a Zionist? And to what extent is Jared Kushner a Zionist? Because Jared Kushner has said before, he said, at some point in the future, Israel is going to have free trade and open borders. It's going to have free movement of people. Does that sound like Zionism to you? Of course, functionally at the moment, Jared Kushner is playing the role of a Zionist in the Trump administration because Trump has basically picked him out to form an alliance with people like Sheldon Adelson and the Singer family, Paul Singer, and the Mercer family or whoever, people who are pretty committed Zionists. So he's chosen Kushner to be the ambassador to Zionists, but when you look at the statements that Kushner has made about the long-term stability of Israel, he says Israel can only survive as an open society. And so Kushner's basically on board with Soros. The people who live in Israel recognize that if they get demographically swamped by Muslims, that they're not going to have the same political situation they have right now. And so the people who live in Israel are very cagey about multiculturalism in Israel, naturally. And their supporters internationally, people like Adelson and Singer, they obviously support the Zionist movement and the Zionist cause. But is that synonymous with Judaism? And you kind of have to understand the distinction between a majoritarian strategy and a minoritarian strategy, that ultimately Israel didn't exist for 2,000 years, and Jews get on quite well. They didn't always get on quite well. There were a lot of hard times for the Jews. But Judaism doesn't rely on Zionism. Zionism is not the ultimate foundation of Judaism. Zionism is a particular outgrowth of Judaism. Zionism is the concept that Jews should employ a majoritarian strategy within the state of Israel. Is that sustainable? And is, when we look, again, the dependence of the two ideologies, Judaism as a religion, Zionism as a political ideology, which is dependent upon which? If Zionism disappeared tomorrow, would we still have Jews in Judaism? Yeah, about 6 million Jews in the United States alone would still exist as Jews culturally, religiously, and so on, ethnically. and they would continue pursuing what they felt was in their interest and in their worldview. So the Jews the world over are not dependent on Zionism. Zionists will make the argument that if there's ever political persecution of Jews, they can always come home to Israel. But when you look at the geopolitics of Israel, Israel's in a very precarious situation. I mean, you look at all that's going on in Syria, you look at what's going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah, you look at Hamas in the West Bank, you look at the power of Iran, you look at, Saddam Hussein was launching the missiles at Israel during what was it, which Gulf War was it? He might have done it in multiple conflicts. He might just launching missiles at Israel just for fun, I guess. But you look at all the dangers surrounding Israel, and when Zionists make this argument of like, oh, well, Israel needs to exist because if there's ever a pogrom, if there's any anti-Jewish discrimination, you can always come home to Israel. Is that really a good idea? Is that really smart from, again, a strategic position of Jews? If it just put I know my majority of my audience doesn't often do this, but put yourself in the shoes of a Jew. Put yourself in the mindset of what would be best for the Jews. Concentrating the entire global Jewish population into the state of Israel, is that a smart thing? Is that going to be beneficial for Jewish power and influence? Is that going to help the Jewish people? I don't think so. I think there are cases to be made on an individual level, on a sort of case-by-case basis where you can say, okay, well, here's a guy who he sought political immunity in Israel, or here's some people in France who moved to Israel because of anti-Semitism. You can look at short-term trends and short-term problems, and you can say, okay, yeah, Israel is helping Jews in this way or that way. Israel is promoting Jewish interests in this way or that way. You can argue sort of the particulars and the specifics, and I would say that those are legitimate points in the short term. But in the long term, in the big picture, is Israel a good idea? I think the smartest people in the Jewish community recognize no. They recognize that Israel is a construct of the British Empire through the British Mandate in union with the Rothschilds. It's a particular idea of Zionism, okay? But it doesn't represent the fundamental nature or worldview or general minoritarian strategy of the Jewish people. In some ways, I've argued before, Israel has basically been set up as a sacrifice. Israel has been set up in the Middle East with its 6 million Jews, surrounded by people who hate it for, certain reasons. Maybe they feel as if their land has been stolen. Maybe they feel like Israel has been anti-Muslim in certain ways. So maybe they even feel Israel's been anti-Christian in certain ways. So people hate Israel for certain reasons, certain anti-Semitic nonsensical reasons. But anyway, Israel's been set up in this position where two futures lie for Israel. Either Israel's going to become, as Kushner says, an open society, which means Muslims are going to come in, displace the Jews, and it's no longer going to be a majoritarian Jewish state, or Israel's going to go to war with Iran eventually, and Iran is going to win. Iran's going to win at some point with all of its proxies, with Syria, with Iraq, with Lebanon, Hezbollah, the West Bank, Hamas, all these people. So those are the two futures for Israel that have been set up for it. In either case, I don't think Israel has a long-term future. Again, whether it's through warfare, whether it's through demographics, as a majoritarian Jewish state that is a state with a Jewish majority, I don't think it has a long-term future. So I don't think it's, again, when people view everything through the lens of Zionism, you have to understand, again, if we're going to talk about the long-term versus the short-term, Zionism has only been around for like 2 centuries. Now, it's true that Jews for a long time have viewed Israel as the Holy Land. The theology of Judaism says that Yahweh is going to bring the Jews back to Israel. Not that secularists and Zionists and socialists and Bibi Netanyahu is going to bring the Jews back to Israel. But actually, Yahweh is going to pick up the Jews and divinely bring them all back to Israel at the same time. Not that they're going to gradually move there and immigrate there. So they've taken the prophecies of the Torah, and they've distorted those, and they've twisted those, and they've secularized those prophecies to create Zionism. Zionism's not a good strategy. Again, just looking purely objectively, Zionism is not a good strategy. There are particular instances where it helps, if you're trying to do money laundering, if you're trying to scam people, if you're trying to set up shell companies that you make it look like it's based in Illinois, but it's actually based in Israel, and you sell people cheap Chinese products, and you do telemarketing scams and those sort of things. In that sense, you could say Israel has some beneficial aspects to it, but in the big picture of things, Israel's not very useful. If you look at the average IQ is very reductionist. It's not a perfect measurement of agency or anything, especially not on an individual level. But you look at the average IQ of Jewish Israelis, it's below 100. You have a huge Sephardi population. You look at Jews in the Western world, they're mostly Ashkenazi. They have higher IQs. So, Israel seems to be a concentration of Jews who are unable to deal with anti-Semitism. They are unable to assimilate, that is, they are unable to function in the Western world. And so, in a sense, there's a self-segregating process by which Jews who are unable to deal with the modern world escape to Israel. They flee to Israel, which is not a very strategically good idea. But then the Jews who are adaptive, who are able to assimilate, who are able to deal with the Western world and deal with anti-Semitism, those Jews stay in the West, and those Jews have access to power. So that's kind of the analysis of Israel there. Let's see what the reaction is. Satan equals Prometheus. Okay, well, yeah, Satan equals Prometheus there's something to that, I suppose. Giorgiani's into the occult. Giorgiani's off, but interesting. Why, yes, I went from advocating for Zoroastrianism on behalf of the State Department to advocating for Satanism on behalf of Nietzsche. How could you tell? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how pragmatic all of that is, but I guess some people like it. Sounds very Gnostic. I think Richard said it best about Giorgiani. He's a dreamer in the best, worst in the sense of the term. We need our dreamers sometimes. Okay. How about you dream about like having some kind of, I don't know. If people want to dream, why don't you dream up a religion? All you people, all the people who are saying like, oh, we need to dream. Why don't you dream up a religion? Why can't you guys get together and form a religion? Because only a religion is going to save you. Why can't you dream up a religion? What happens is you've got people dreaming about Nietzscheanism and Satanism and Prometheus, and then you've got Christians and you've got Catholics and Orthodox, and you've got all these dreamers out there, and you're just dreaming up all these different things, and you can't come together and form a common dream. So I don't know. I think like dreaming, maybe the point is correct. Maybe you do need dreamers. Maybe you do need to dream. But it seems like the dreaming is this hyper-modern dreaming where everyone has their own specific individual dream, and we can never come together and agree on a common dream. We can't exist within the common. If we compare this to like the schizophrenic state of mind, we all have our particular schizophrenic ideas where we don't have any common pantheon of gods who speak to all of us. So there's no unity here. It's just different dreamers dreaming up different separate dreams, unable to come together, unable to form something cohesive. So I don't know. It seems to me like the kind of dreaming, you're having many quantities of dreams, many variations of dreams, but there's no power behind the dreams because they can't unite and syncretize and form a common collective consciousness or unconsciousness of dreaming, a dream consciousness. What Giorgiani said about Satanism and the Antichrist, but it's about Israel. Giorgiani's conversations with Mishlov on the show New Thinking Aloud are enlightening. Giorgiani has always had an interesting perspective. All these conversations are worth it. Check out his books. Zionists take offense at their state being prompted by Anglos. They think they're superior. Yeah, Zionists do definitely, when you explain this to Zionists, when you're like, hey, look, we need to destroy Iran, and you're kind of like a pawn in that situation. If you ever try to explain that to Zionists, they get very offended. At that point, they're like, no, we control you, we control everything. And it's clearly true that like Adelson and Mercer and Singer are very powerful lobbyists, and it's true that AIPAC is very powerful. I'm not denying that. But it's clearly foreign influence in American elections, and it's only allowed because Anglos see it to their advantage. If Anglos tomorrow, for whatever reason, decided that Iran is my true friend, friendship canceled with Israel, AIPAC would be made into an illegal organization, and all of that money and power wouldn't matter anymore. If Anglos decided they didn't like what was going on, they could, declare the Zionists to be illegal, but they're not going to do that because Zionism is in their interest. This is like again, it's a balanced picture where the idea that Anglos have no power and they're just total puppets and total pawns of the Zionists is an exaggeration. On the other hand, the idea that Zionists have no power is an exaggeration, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. Kushner gets off on his own image as the boogeyman. I don't know. I recall getting into a YouTube comment debate a year ago with Kenneth in which he argued the opposite of what he's arguing now as it relates to Zionist control of U.S. foreign policy. That's possible. Yeah, I definitely did used to not really understand some of the just basic, like, I think to me a lot of it comes down to, how do I say this? But you kind of want to simplify the model, right? So blaming everything on Zionists gives you sort of an easy model. You could say, well, if Israel just didn't exist, our Middle Eastern policy would be supporting Iran, it would be Zoroastrianism, we'd have peace in the Middle East. And it's like, no, fundamentally, an empire wants to pursue a divide and conquer strategy. So, I think here's let me try to defend my old views for a moment and defend the views of some of the people probably who watch me. Is that when you are gaslit so often by Zionists who say, oh, Zionists don't exist, Zionism doesn't exist, it's all Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists don't have any influence, AIPAC doesn't exist, and you see the outrage against Ilhan Omar, and you see all of that, there's kind of a reactive tendency when Zionists tell people, we don't exist, and if you believe that Zionism is powerful, then you're an anti-Semite. When you're told that so many times, there's this reactive desire to say Zionists control everything, Zionists are behind everything, it's only because of Zionists that we have war in the Middle East, etc., etc. So there is that reaction, which is sort of a natural emotional reaction, but it's not really logical. And so I've described this before, that when you get into a position that's controversial and you are attacked for your position, it tends to entrench you further and further into your position. And so you further and further rationalize your position, and you're less able to get outside of that position. So in the case of, because it is so socially taboo on the right wing to criticize Israel, people get emotionally entrenched in that position and can't get out of it. On the left, it's a little bit different. But when you look at the Republican Party, it is so taboo to criticize Israel that those who are on the right wing who criticize Israel, they get really entrenched in that on an emotional sense. So, like, I was looking at these arguments and I was like, well, clearly, the argument that Zionists don't have any power is ridiculous. And so I'm going to swing to the other side and say, well, Israel is the focal point of everything in the Middle East. But after having stepped back, after seeing basically the emotional hysterics around Iran is what kind of made me take a step back, because I saw all these people getting emotionally hysterical about Iran, and I asked, where's the objective analysis? Where's the objective perspective here? You don't have to have an attachment to American imperialism to do an objective analysis. So, I think that just like anybody else, my thinking is emotionally motivated. And so it's really hard to disentangle that emotional motivation from sort of objective fact and objective analysis. That's a process that really takes work to go through, and it's not something that you achieve in a day. So a lot of the component parts are not new to me. Like I've understood like the US dollar system for a while. I've understood, divide and conquer strategy. So I've understood a lot of the component parts, but I wasn't really able to put that together in a coherent narrative. Really, it wasn't until just looking at the emotionality and hysterics of the Soleimani strike where I was like, I sort of saw that. I was like, whoa, I can see other people doing this, and I can see, hey, this is like, this isn't clear thinking. This is very emotional. And then I sort of reflected and said, oh, well, I've done this as well. And so I sort of had a reevaluation at this point, which is what we're now promoting. And it's a very big brain centrist where you obviously the idea that Sheldon Adelson isn't like promoting certain actors in elections, or that he doesn't have power as a rich person, as a money man, is obviously not true. But the idea that he stands alone, and that the Zionists stand alone in American geopolitics, and that they don't interact with any other Anglo interests or imperial interests, it's almost like an isolationist concept, not in the sense of America being alone, but isolation in the sense you're isolating the concept of Zionism and viewing it as the like an if and only if kind of a statement. Like you're saying Zionism is exclusively the driver behind Middle East foreign policy. But if you look at the way that America treats Iran, it's very similar to the way that we treat other regional hegemons like Russia or like China. And people will even do this thing where they'll say, well, North Korean policy really is about Israel because North Korea has an alliance with Iran. And I mean, again, there can be some truth there, but the idea that is just this totalistic, simplistic heuristic where we can take this one thing and we can understand all of foreign policy through that lens, you're not understanding the history, you're not understanding the background. And you're not running through that experiment of, okay, well, what would the Middle East look like if Israel didn't exist? The idea that we would just support Iran or be neutral or withdraw from the region ignores the way that the US dollar system works. It ignores the way that British imperialism worked. It ignores, what is the incentives in the military-industrial complex. The idea that without Israel we wouldn't have a military-industrial complex is kind of ridiculous because we've had one, at least since 1917, if not earlier. I mean, we've been an empire, the Spanish-American War, the War of 1812, pretty much every war that America has fought has been a war of imperial expansion. We have fought no defensive wars. America has fought 0 defensive wars. So the idea that we're not an empire, that there's not an imperial aspect to the state, is pretty ridiculous. Now, whether you affirm that or deny that or think we should collapse the American government, I'm personally pretty skeptical of the idea that collapsing the American economy is a good idea. But if that's what you're going to go for, let's be honest about that. Let's understand the consequences of these ideas and not view them in isolation. See the interconnected web of things. There was a botched cloning attempt the CIA ran on Giorgiani in terms of its original purpose. The clone was a total failure. So it was instead put to work human testing GMOs and experimental forms of soybean oil. You can find him on YouTube at Report of the Week. Very funny. More like 200,000 to 300,000 in my estimation. I have no clue what that refers to. Most Jews actually live outside of the state of Israel in diaspora. Yes, that is what we've pointed out. There's 6 million in the United States, 6 million in Israel, and then roughly like 2 million or 4 million. And it's hard when you start considering Judaism. It keeps morphing and evolving and changing so that you have people who, if you ask them, are you Jewish on like a census, they'll say, oh, no, I'm not Jewish. And you'd be like, okay, well, are your parents Jewish? They're like, well, yeah, my parents are Jewish, but I identify as a Buddhist. I identify as a Christian. I identify as an atheist. I identify as a Gnostic. Oh, I'm actually a Levantean Satanist. So that when you ask like how many Jews are there, if you consider people who are married to Jews, people with Jewish parents, and so on, the number of Jews starts blowing up to something like, instead of being like a global population of 14 to 60 million, it starts to be like 30 million, depending on how you define Jewishness. Not in a categorical, like you're either fully Jewish or you're not Jewish at all, but you start seeing the spectrum of Judaism that exists. You start to get a different picture. British U.S. imperialism supporting far-right projects like Zionism is nothing new. Why can't Israel just stay demographically Jewish? So the argument of Kushner is essentially that if Israel has closed borders, it's going to be a fragile state. It's not going to be integrated into the region. And so Kushner's saying that if Israel wants to integrate itself into the region and have a greater Israel, it needs to eliminate its borders. It needs freedom of trade, freedom of movement. And so Kushner is imagining the transformation of Israel into a minoritarian Jewish state where Jews are not the majority, but where they control finance and they control politics, and there's a majority Arab Sunni Muslim population living under Jewish domination. That is the future that he wants for Israel. Of course, that's antithetical to Zionism, but that's what he would like for the future of Israel. Israel has nukes. True. Are Christian Zionists who worship Israel more pathetic than Progs who kiss the feet of migrants? At least migrants have some conceivable claim to suffering. I think Christian Zionists, most of them, have not really spent too much time around Jews. And they're very weird. I've spoken to Christian Zionists where I'm like, okay, so you support Israel, right? And then they'll be like, yeah. And then most of them have never been there, but then some of them who have, I'm like, okay, so you went to Israel. Are they friendly to Christianity? Do they allow you to evangelize? And they're like, oh no, actually they spit on Christians and they ban evangelization. So the state of Israel is actually kind of anti-Christian. I'm like, okay, so do you support Israel? And they're like, yeah, because the Bible says we're supposed to. So they're very dogmatic. Christian Zionists are extremely dogmatic and doctrinal, which is why, there's an overlap between Christian Zionism and young earth creationism and those kinds of very dogmatic, ignore the fossils, ignore science. Science is not an authority because they're so, again, single-mindedly, they take the Bible in isolation. That's the only thing that's true. We can't compare it to anything else. We can't question anything else. And so I think that's really the mentality of Christian Zionists, is not so much, they're not very empathetic toward Jewish people in essence, but they feel that they've been commanded by dogma to express a kind of pragmatic or functional utilitarian empathy. Whereas I think progressives who like migrants, I think progressives like migrants for two reasons. I think they like migrants because they view it as a weapon against the working class, and progressives view that as a form of class warfare. And I also think progressives see migrants as introducing a new vitality to the West. So I don't think it's a question of who's more pathetic. Although if you ask the question who has more empathy, I would say that certain types of progressives, like true believer progressives, might have more empathy for migrants. Although these women who love migrants, I don't think it's so much empathy as it is sexuality. I think they're sexually attracted to migrants. So I don't think it's so much empathy there, but sometimes it's a mixture. I've spoken to women because I try to talk to people who have differing views, and I've spoken to women who have worked in migrant camps, if you can believe that. A lot of the things I say, it sounds like I'm just making stories up or lying, so I guess take it with a grain of salt or whatever. But my personal experience talking to a woman who worked in a migrant camp, I was like, so tell me about these guys who are in these or just tell me about the people you work with. And she's like, well, they're mostly men, and they're in their 20s or 30s, but I kind of view them like my kids, like my children. And this woman had no children of her own, and so she kind of viewed these migrants as children. But she'd also tell me stories of how they would come on to her and how they'd be they would ask her if they could pay her for sex, and she'd have to like explain feminist theory to them. They didn't really get it. She'd be like, well, it's hard because they come from the different culture with his a very different relation to women, and so it's we work with them. So there was like a weird, like a Freudian thing where on the one hand she viewed them as her children, and on the other hand there was this clear, like, it wasn't just sexual tension. It was like they were like, so how much for see boobs? So how much for see boobs? I have $5, $10. How much? One boob, two boob? $5 one boob, $10 two boob? And she's like, then she's explaining like feminist theory to them. So I think that the question of empathy, I mean, we can go full Iran and Ayn Rand, full libertarian, and say something like, oh, well, all empathy is selfish at the end of the day. All altruism is selfish, or something like that. But I think there are genuine forms of empathy, the empathy that we have for our friends, for our children, for our in-group. So who is more empathetic? Are the Christian Zionists more empathetic toward Jews? Or are the progressives more empathetic toward migrants? I would say that I think that the progressives are more empathetic to migrants, but it's a slim margin there, because I think there's a lot of other aspects. Again, there's the class warfare aspect, there's the sexual aspect, so there's a lot that's going on psychologically. Let's see, I dream about race and crime statistics. Sounds like a nightmare. Sounds like a nightmare. I have a dream that one day I will club my... We can't say that. We cannot say that on the stream. For density, that is not an okay joke. And it's not a funny joke either. That is not okay. That's not okay, and we're not going to talk any further about that. That's not the topic of this video. Don't try to get me off topic here. We're trying to dream up a religion, but the space is limited by residual Christian cringe. I don't know. I'm not convinced that just like... Look, the Mormons are technically Christians in a way, and they're doing quite well for themselves. So you haven't convinced me that like Christian cringe is what's holding you back. Maybe it's pagan cringe that's holding people back. There's nothing more cringe than Hinduism. I don't think Hinduism is the most cringe religion. But, I question if that's the best way to go forward. The balkanization of epistemology, yeah, that's definitely going on. How powerful that is. No one Zionist should have all that jouissance. Is that a Kanye? Are we doing Kanye now? No one Zionist should have all that power. Well, they don't have all that power by themselves. They have to work with Anglos. They have to cooperate. They can't just do things on their own. They have to. I mean, there was some. I think it was Truman. There was some Truman quote about Harry Truman when he was president, and he was talking about the Zionists, and he was like, "These guys are really pushy. They're really pushy. They're very aggressive. They're very assertive. I'm trying to like balance like different interests here, because at the time you have to remember Saudi Arabia and Israel were not friends at all, and the Arabs and the Israelis didn't get along at all. It was a much worse situation than it is now, and so he's trying to balance this. Iran was not the power that it is today. Of course, the Iranian Revolution hadn't happened, and you had the Shah of Iran was in power. I don't know if he was in power in the 40s or when he came to power, if he was already in power at that point. All the changes in government are a little bit fuzzy. But anyway, he was like trying to balance these different considerations. And the Zionists were just, he's like, they're very pushy. And it was very annoying. I was just very annoyed about how pushy they were, about how single-mindedly they were pushing this thing and using threats. And he wasn't really appreciating it. But ultimately what you see there is that the Zionists couldn't just do what they wanted to do. They had to push Harry Truman. They had to work with Harry Truman. They had to use the carrot. They had to use the stick. So ultimately, they didn't single-handedly hold the power, but they kind of had to beat the Anglo about the chest, breast, and head to get what they wanted. So the Anglo hasn't disappeared. The Anglo still exists, and the Zionists have to deal with the Anglo. Like, the dealing has to occur. They can't simply, the best they're going to get. Look, Bernie Sanders might be the first Jewish president. He might be also the most anti-Israel president that we've had for a long while. So it's very difficult for Jews to maneuver themselves into explicit positions of power where they simply hold the power. Probably the best they've done is like Zelensky in Ukraine and all the other Jewish appointees in Ukraine, where they've taken a country which is one of the most anti-Semitic countries in Europe, and pretty much the entire presidential cabinet's all Jews. That's kind of impressive. But then again, Ukraine's a third world country, which filled with like neo Nazis. So what can you expect from that quality of a country that they're going to be able to resist just the complete Jewish takeover of their country? But in the Western world and other places, there is this cooperation that has to go on. They can't act alone. They have to act in concert with the Anglos. And so ultimately, like, they have to come to a consensus. They have to be able to agree. I think, ultimately, whether you think Freemasonry is still relevant today, obviously, like, if you walk into a Freemasonic lodge, you're not going to, like, start shaking hands with the presidents and with, important members of government. So the Freemasonic lodges themselves as institutions are not very powerful. But the Freemasonic ideal, which is this ideal ultimately of a kind of perennialism of bringing Anglos and Jews together, which was Oliver Cromwell's idea to an extent, the idea of bringing these two groups together and forming an ethnic coalition between these two groups, Anglo-Normans and Jews. It's a cooperation, it's a collaboration. And so they're partners in a relationship, and neither of those partners can really go off the reservation and act independently. They have to constantly be in concert and in dialogue with one another. And they're sort of dependent on one another in that respect. I mean, the Anglos still, you look at who, actually the generals of the military, they're not Jewish, they're very much Anglo in a lot of respects. Or, Patton, I guess, a lot of those guys who are descended from Civil War generals. Eisenhower, I guess, was ethnically German, but had kind of assimilated to the Anglos. I mean, if you look what Eisenhower did in, what was it, the Rheinweisen lager camps, the camps on the Rhine, he was not very pro-German. But, a lot of the generals today, Petraeus, Mattis, I'm thinking Flynn, people like this, they're still, they're either Anglos or assimilated into Anglo culture. Not a lot of Jews there. And they still, at the end of the day, they do have direct control of the military. Of course, they were appointed by the civilian government and so on. But if we're talking about, like, okay, so if we look at the Forbes list and we look at the Jews in the Forbes list and financial power, judicial power, Supreme Court, whatever, we're going to find statistics like the Supreme Court is, 30 or 40% Jewish. Finance in general, like the top 10s on the Forbes is like 30 to 40%. For the top 100, it's like close to 10% or whatever. So you're looking through these different statistics and you're finding different levels of Jewish presence. But the military, like there are Jews in the military, but they're not anywhere near the sort of 10 to 30% that they achieve in other areas like media or finance. Or, if you look at the impeachment process, you've got Nadler, you've got, who's the other guy? Adam Schiff. You've got Chuck Schumer. And who's pushing it in the media? You've got Rachel Maddow. You've got, I guess Jon Stewart isn't so popular anymore. He's not really on the airwaves too much necessarily anymore. But clearly, like, they have a pretty big presence in terms of if we're looking at the media, we're looking at finance, we're looking at the judicial system, the legal system, lawyers, who are Trump's lawyer, the O.J. Simpson guy that he brought out, who is connected with Jeffrey Epstein. What's the name of that guy? He's like the O.J. lawyer. If I just search O.J. lawyer, the Dream Team, who represented Barry Scheck, Carl Douglas, Hawley, Robert Shapiro, Robert Kardashian, Alan Dershowitz. That's the one I was thinking of, Alan Dershowitz. The Dream Team for O.J. Simpson. Got Neufeld, Scheck, Dershowitz, and Shapiro, and some of those people there. So they're defending OJ, who, by the way, killed Ronald Goldman. So, there's presence. There's a presence there, but the military specifically, the presence is a little bit smaller. So there has to be a cooperation. It can't be a single. They can't really override each other. It's almost a governmental structure to the relationship, where it's like you've got the two branches of government: the Anglo branch, the Jewish branch, and then everybody else. And you could say there's infinite branches of that government, but that's kind of a model that you can think of. I wonder how Christian fundamentalist evangelicals would interpret the destruction of Israel in the future if it is essentially sacrificed for larger geopolitical goals. Yeah, I don't know exactly what they would do or how they would interpret that. But I think, I think evangelical Christianity and fundamentalist Christianity is becoming less popular, but they're also not going away just because of their high birth rates. Organizations like AIPAC even existing as a scathing condemnation of liberalism, like, bruh, shut it down, who are these clowns? I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly what's meant there. Would this be their fulfillment of Revelation in some weird way? I mean, again, my projection for Israel is the Kushner plan, where essentially Israel becomes, it takes over the West Bank, it takes over the Gaza Strip, and basically consolidates its position. And then eventually they say, at some point in the future, okay, we're going to allow a limited right of return. We're going to have limited open borders. We're going to have some limited immigration. And then eventually you're going to get a Jewish minority. I don't think it's going to blow up into a big war. But that is a possibility. I'm sure they would rationalize it as they always do. Steve Saylor has the only serious IQ charts relating to Christian denominations. It's not looking good for the non-progressive Protestant groups. It's looking good for the Mormons. I'll say it's looking good for the Mormons and probably like the Episcopalians. But there's some things going on. Evangelicals have strong birth rates, but I don't know that they're, like, at the end of the day, Pompeo he represents himself as an evangelical. But I don't know that he is in his heart of hearts. Who's more aesthetic, WASPs or Mormons? WASPs created Mormons, so that's kind of the one is a subset of the other. Mormons are extremely Anglo-Protestant in their heritage. Higher IQs below 130 probably just mean more ability to follow bizarre progressive social conventions. Scroll back up here. More like 200,000. I have no clue what you're talking about, Michael. I don't know what you're referring to. WASP had the transatlantic accent. Christians are very dogmatic. Christian Zionists be like, the Bible makes me support the state apparatus known as Israel and a man called Bibi Netanyahu. Yeah, true. You'll notice in my analysis, I'm talking about Anglo-imperialism, and Zionism. I'm not talking about Christian Zionism, which is just a sort of a subset or product of Zionism. Not really an independent power in its own right. Good analysis. The problem is not with balance of power. If Israel was dumb, the U.S. could manipulate them. Israel is smart, so it exerts power over the U.S. Compare Israel to Saudi in influence. Kenneth is talking to leftist white women. I have spoken to them. I mean, your implication is not correct there. That's one of my turnoffs. When she starts talking about her work in the refugee camps, when she starts talking about how she's been solicited for prostitution by refugees, it's one of my turnoffs. Women are just great. I have a friend that went to volunteer to camps of Syrian refugees. She's not even outright liberal. They really do see children in these people. Yeah, it's a weird Freudian thing where they see them as like partially children and also partially as like sex partners. Like all of these women are basically your archetypal like 20-something high school teacher who is like, flirting with the football team or whatever. It's just a thing that exists. You can say it's good or bad or whatever judgment you want to pass, but certainly a thing that exists. Most whites who go to the third world and do pointless volunteer work are Christians, I believe. Yeah, Christians or progressive atheists and so on. Kenneth has a seemingly erratic schedule. Traveled abroad. Has all variety of interesting contexts. Could he be a Fed? Dude, I wish. I wish the federal government would employ me. That would be awesome. I'm ready to get my check from the federal government. I'm ready for it. I mean, look, you don't even have to pay me a lot. I'll take a very modest salary just so that I can do this all day. That would be great. I'll just change. I won't talk about sensitive issues anymore. We'll just like reiterate talking points. You literally just have to type up a script and I'll just read it. It would be, but I haven't, I've applied. They haven't got back to me. They've ghosted me. So this is what I'm saying. Look, if you'd like me to, literally this is for anyone, federal government, anybody out there, anybody, I don't really care who it is. Could be someone in the chat. If you want to give me a salary and print me out a weekly script that I read out on the show, I'm happy to do it. We can negotiate something very modest. I'm not a greedy man. I'll be happy to do it for you. He literally put echoes in his avatar. Whoa, I can't believe I did that. I totally forgot I did that. Talking about how it's not the echo's fault. Is this a formalist gaslighting? Yeah, I am gaslighting you. But that's crazy. You guys have unveiled a crazy conspiracy today. You guys are smart. I would imagine feds would be interesting to talk to. They presumably had lots of life experience worth hearing about. Yeah, I think feds can be interesting to talk to. I can't even say this. I've talked to people who are retired who have worked in the State Department or specifically in the Department of Justice. I've talked to them there, and I guess if you say that, all of a sudden, like, I don't know, certain people think that, like, if you talk to anyone who's ever worked for the Fed, I mean, Alex Jones is Rob Dew's uncle was working for the government, working for the Fed. So I don't know, like, there are people who will take that and they'll say, like, now you're compromised, now you're basically Hal Turner. And Hal Turner was legitimately a federal informant, and he did promote extremism and he did promote entrapment schemes. So that clearly exists. And I would say the way you immunize yourself from that is you stop being edgy, stop promoting violence, and don't do anything illegal. And then you'll pretty much be fine. I mean, you still have to be aware of ways that the narrative can be skewed in certain directions. And there are some arguments to be made there for getting outside of the memosphere, because the memosphere is very susceptible to sort of top-down manipulation. We think of memes as the most anarchic, free-thinking, just populist. We think it's just organic, bottom-up. It's actually the opposite. Memes are the area of discourse which can be most controlled from the top down by governments, which people think is the opposite, but they're just wrong there. Because, we have all these edgy extremist memes that proves, like, this is the free anarchist right-wing liberal movement. But, the edgy memes they're not what you think they are. This is disgusting liberal racism. Do not read John Locke, kids. Watch Rubenstein interview Bezos. You'll understand everything. Haven't seen that interview. Maddow isn't chosen? What do you mean Maddow isn't are you saying Rachel Maddow isn't Jewish? Is that what you're saying? Because that's a joke. Fox News is more chosen than MSNBC. I don't know what the statistics is on that, but I mean, if you're talking about support for Israel, clearly Fox News supports Israel more than MSNBC. That's not disputable. Anglo-Norman Jewish elite attacking the German middle class. That's one way to put it. Their goal was not to dominate the militaries, to conquer institutions that control perception and money. Yeah, I don't think Jews are very interested in like cultivating a class of generals to put into. I think they understand what their strengths are. So that's not really their goal, but also I don't think they can really act independently. I don't think that they can. I think they understand they need to cooperate with other interests. So Zionism is a way that they found a common point between Anglo imperialism and Jewish interests, which in the long term I would argue is not really going to be good for Jewish people. But that is kind of the compromise that's been made, and it wouldn't have had to have been made if this compromise wasn't necessary. Like if Jews could just sort of act independently and not like if Jews were the only people who existed in the world, you would just see internecine like Jew against Jew. You'd see like the Soros versus the Netanyahu and that sort of thing. But that's not the only thing that's going on. There are other forms of compromise that need to be made. There are other interests that exist. This is like the minoritarian analysis. It's not like one group controls everything absolutely, but that you have different groups and different interests that then have to make compromises with one another. Christian Zionism is a majoritarian phenomenon with no agency profited upon by actual elites. Why is this all about Anglos and not Gentile whites as a whole? Joel Davis has made this claim, which I think stems from his ignorance of American white demographics. Well, Anglo, I'm not saying that to... Like, when I use this term Anglo, I'm using it because it refers specifically to the British imperial heritage as opposed to, like, the German Empire or the French Empire. What I'm saying is that the American white Gentile elite is an extension or a continuation of the British imperial mindset and the British imperial strategy. That's my claim, which you could relate to like Moldbug talking about Protestantism and Calvinism and things like that. So I'm not saying that literally like every white Gentile is Anglo-Saxon or a Norman or something like that, but I'm saying on a cultural level, strategic level, historical level, that's why I'm talking about the Anglo tradition. Not because I think everyone who is like a white Gentile who has money or power or influence is necessarily of Anglo-Saxon Norman descent. That's not the claim I'm making. I'm claiming a continuation between two traditions. Australia white basically means Anglo, certainly not in America. I think it means Anglo culturally. I mean, we speak English, right? So to that extent, we have an Anglo culture. You can talk about Germans all you want, but I think ultimately most Germans have assimilated, like German elites. Like if you look at Merkel, essentially Merkel is functionally acting in line with Anglo interests, whether she's an Anglo or not or whatever. You know, or Macron or someone like this. You can take people of different ethnicities and you can say, well, they're acting in concert with Anglo interests. So are they Anglo? Well, to an extent, you say they are integrated with the Anglo system. And certainly if someone speaks English, that's why I just sort of use the term Anglo. The term Anglo refers to elites, basically. I'm not referring to a low Protestant Anglos. Really, low Protestant Anglos are more similar to Germans in a lot of ways in their mentality. So I'm talking about a certain mentality, not like a strict ethnic lineage. Jews are complaining about the price cost of living in Israel. I'm sure they are complaining. Also, international financial agencies with Jewish board of directors have started to yell Yiddish phrases about Israel. I haven't heard that story, so maybe you can link me. I haven't seen that before. Imagine getting a salary for shit posting on the internet for a state that's the dream. I don't know that Arvel would love that. But I would embrace that. If someone wants to make the offer, look, DM me on Twitter. I'm out here. I'm ready to get the salary. But I don't know. You have to be very talented to get the salary, and you have to be strict. See, my posting career, my posting history has not been strict. If my goal in life was to get a salary from the federal government, I should have just never said anything controversial. In fact, this video is not really going to help me get that salary. But hopefully it is educative for people. Hello, William. Reddit, Twitter, and probably 4chan and other image boards probably have many salaried shit posters. And also they probably have artificial intelligence working there. I mean, it's not difficult to just set up a robot to just spam memes on different websites. Raw onion eating is a judicial conspiracy, apparently. Yeah, that's possible. There used to be some belief in freedom, but now the government operates like the KGB in communist level surveillance. Well, the difference here is that we surveil ourselves rather than the government surveilling us. Like, we tell social media what we believe and say, where we are, and what we're doing. You know, we put everything, we dox ourselves. We don't need the government spying on us, we spy on ourselves. And I think, well, anyway, let's move on. Why did you not react to my comment? Torin McCabe, what was your comment? Good analysis. The problem is not with balance of power. I don't know what that means. The problem is not with balance of power. You need to make one statement at a time. Like, one statement per comment, because I don't know what that means. The problem is not with balance of power. I think the Middle East, the way that people view the Middle East, the way imperialists view the Middle East is we're trying to make sure Iran does not become a hegemon. If Israel was dumb, the U.S. could manipulate them. I didn't say, where did I say Israel was dumb? I didn't say Israel is dumb. I did say the Jewish population in Israel has a lower IQ than the diaspora Jewish population, but I didn't say, quote unquote, Israel is dumb. That's not a statement I made if you're ascribing that to me. Israel is smart, so it exerts power over the United States. I haven't contradicted that. I haven't said that Zionists don't have power. I haven't said that Israel doesn't have power. What I'm saying is that American foreign policy in the Middle East in terms of fomenting wars, chaos, regime change, and war against Iran would not change whether or not we have Israel. In fact, Israel comes after the fact of Anglo-imperialism in the Middle East. Israel was invented by Anglo-imperialism, not the other way around. We're not conducting an imperialist policy in the Middle East because of Israel. We created Israel, and I'm saying we here as we're Westerners and our leaders created Israel as a way to promote imperialism in the Middle East. So that's my argument. Not that Israel doesn't have influence, just to say that that influence is a cooperative influence, not an antagonistic influence. It's not that the Jews have tied up our wonderful Anglo leaders. Oh, you know, Trump would just love to have peace with Iran, but you know, the Jews have just tied him up. They forced him to marry his daughter to the Kushner family. Or not just Trump in particular, because people have all kinds of weird emotional attachments to Trump. But oh no, it's you know, I'm sure that General Mattis would just love for peace in the Middle East, or I'm sure just Anglos in general, whatever you want to call them, but you know, post-Freemason elite or whatever you want to call these people. But choose any. I'm sure Bill Gates would just love peace in the Middle East. I'm sure all these people, all these white Gentile elites, I'm sure they just would love to be friends with Iran. All these people in the State Department, all these people in the military-industrial complex, I'm sure Boeing would just love to have peace with Iran. I'm sure all of our elites, all the financial elites, I'm sure they would just love Iran to break away from the dollar system. I'm sure they just absolutely want all of that. But we have these Jews, they're just tying people up and holding hostage. They're being held at gunpoint. All of our lovely, you know, they just love Iran. All of the elites, they love Iran. But then the Jews have come along and they've held a gun to their head and they said, no, you must go to war with Iran. My argument is that with Jews or without Jews, we would still be in conflict with Iran. The reason for conflict with Iran is not fundamentally to do with Israel, although that doesn't really change the situation, right? It probably amplifies it and makes it even a higher stakes situation. But what I'm saying is that ultimately you don't need Israel for the American State Department to be antagonistic toward Iran. That Israel is not the fundamental, it's not the only reason. That's my argument. So that's my reaction. But your comment wasn't very clear, and you're going to have to clarify your statements. Also, Torin, if you want to post a long comment, I will get a new Discord link up. So if people want to like write me an essay to respond to, they can go into the Discord I'm going to pull up a new link here. Let's see, we have some posts in politics. Bioweapons in Southern Africa, the development of agents. Okay, well, we're not going to read that. We're going to create a new invite for people like Torin who want to. I have to edit this link. It's going to expire never, and it's going to get 5 uses. So we're going to generate a new link there, and then we're going to post that in the thing like this. Okay, excuse me. Bam. All right. So now we'll post this in the chat. 5 people can join. And when you join, you're not going to be able to see anything except the rules. And if you like the rules, you can DM me on Discord and I will make you a rule respecter. And then you can post a big long comment. To that effect, let us make a well, let's not make a divergence. I'll do that at the end. We might respond to the hangist. Memes, salaried ship poster, where do I apply? Well, I think you start off in the Model UN. I think that's where you start off. Memes are the most social engineered realm, true. Memes are a great propaganda tool, true. To influence America, more than Saudi Arabia can influence America. Okay, so let's go back. International realists are not worried about balance of power. That's not true. They are worried that Israel is smart enough to America over, say, I don't know what that, smart enough to influence America. I don't think they're worried about Israeli influence so much as they're reacting to Israeli influence and also understanding that Israel's goals in the Middle East. How much time do we have here? We have like less than 30 minutes. Israel's goals in the Middle East are in confluence with a balance of power strategy. You're just asserting, oh, international realists don't care about balance of power. Where are you getting that from? I think my assumptions are based on historical precedent. What are your assumptions based on? Just assertion. What's your argument? It's not self-evident to me at all. Edgy memes are porn. Rachel Maddow had one Semitic grandparent she raised in a conservative Catholic household, according to Wikipedia. Okay, well, I mean, if that's the case, then she sure is. Rachel Maddow is this woman's name, and she is. I mean, I'm just looking at her. I'm looking at her. She's the first openly lesbian anchor. I'm a liberal. I'm in total agreement with Eisenhower-era Republican Party platform. Was Eisenhower in favor of free trade? Let's look at her. Paternal grandfather. Her paternal grandmother was Protestant. Her Canadian mother had English and Irish. She said her family is very Catholic and she grew up very conservative. She was a competitive athlete. Cross between a jock and an antisocial girl, she was outed as a freshman by the college newspaper, recipient of a Rhodes Scholarship. Well, she fooled me. She definitely fooled me there. I guess I've learned something about Rachel Maddow today. Okay. That's interesting. I am educated now. Okay, Torin. I will make Torin into a rule respecter so he can post. And I'll make Roy GB Give into a rule respecter. All right, back to the chat. Wasps and Mormons are ethnically the same, other than Swedes marrying Mormons. What can we learn from Otto Weiniger? I guess we'd have to read him to learn from him. Ken is going to be employed by the dollhouse like Halsey soon. I don't know who the dollhouse is. Kenneth, I work for the Department of Memetics. Post Kenneth Braun elites. I will make such big, beautiful elites. I'll make the most amazing elites, believe me, folks. Triggered by alarm. Would you please use a less stress-inducing alarm? Well, I have to go in like 20 minutes. I get pissed when that thing goes. Well, that's the intention, right? To interrupt me, to make sure that we get where we're going on time, and we get ready on time. This was supposed to be a short stream. It's just supposed to be an intro. But let's do the hangest. Politics. I don't know why that's not going away. It was somewhere. We've got torrent. Can you certify me? My username is my real name. Yep. You are certified. Let's turn off the sound here. You're certified there, and we're trying to get to the hangest. So the hangest says the reason you associate with figures like Moldbug and Imperius and Neo-Absolutists and GA or whatever, I don't think I associate myself with Moldbug, and I don't think I associate myself with Imperius. Neo-Absolutists, I mean, you're literally only talking about Joel, who I went on a podcast with a couple times, and now he's moving more toward the Richard sphere side of things, which I disagree with him on it, and I've told him I disagree with him on that. So that's a point of disagreement that we have. But before he was doing that, I appeared on a couple of podcasts with him. And I mentioned GA just in its reference because it talks about the development from the ostensive to the imperative to the declarative, which I think is useful. And I give credit where credit's due. That's where I learned about that concept. But otherwise, like the concept of deferral and Adam Katz and formalism and whatnot, I've criticized that if you actually pay attention to when I've spoken about it. It's because you have been a part of that intellectual trail. Well, I won't deny, again, I have learned some things from GA, and I've learned some things from Joel. I haven't really read Moldbug. I haven't really talked to Imperius. You have associated in the past with those figures. I have literally no one that you just listed I've associated with. I've associated with Joel. And I read an essay by Adam Katz. And you say your ideas are more mixed, but I think what you really mean is you're becoming increasingly aware of the suffocating milieu you're in. And you're testing yourself, and you're trying to be open to new ideas. But it's a lot easier to say you have a mixed philosophy than to admit you're currently in a transitory abyss of not knowing what you are. Okay, well, I don't think anything that you just said is contradictory with the way that I represent myself. I've said multiple times on this channel that I'm in a transitory state. I've said multiple times that I'm opposed to suffocating milieus. I'm opposed to the ghettoization of ideas. I'm opposed to the dogmatization of ideas as it exists in this medium. Now, if we were living in a real-life community, dogma would be useful to get everyone on the same page if we are, working toward a specific project or goal. But we don't even know what goal we're working toward here. So I don't deny any of this. You're portraying me as if you know me, Mr. Hangis. Let's get this up on the video capture, so everybody can make reference to. We've got a window capture here, which is, and how do we want to do this? The Jockle suggestions, just so everyone can see what's being said here. Everyone can enjoy this with me. Jockle suggestions. We're going to make this a little bit smaller. Transform. I wish I could transform it beforehand, but unfortunately I can't. Left, right, top, bottom. Let's see how that works out. So here's the hangest. And let's try to get this exactly as it is. Mr. Hangist here. And make this smaller. Make it smaller over here. And then put it down here. So everyone can read what's going on. Your ideas are mixed, but what you really mean is you're aware of a suffocating milieu. I've admitted that. You're testing yourself. That's fine. I'm testing myself. I'm trying to be open to new ideas. Yeah, is that a bad thing? Have I lied about that? No, I'm a conservative. I will not accept new ideas. It's a lot easier to say you have mixed philosophy than to admit you're in a transitory abyss of not knowing what you are. Well, I admit that the central problem that people seem to have, myself included, I admit I don't have a religion. People ask me, what's the ideology? What's the dogma? What's the religion we should follow? I don't have like a firm dogmatic answer for you. So I can admit all of that. So what I'm putting forward is what I believe are things that I do know. Like I think we can talk about geopolitics in a way that makes more sense than these talking points about, Zionists control our Middle East policy. I think it's a little more nuanced than that. So I'm trying to say, okay, well, what things can we explore here, and what kind of out of the box ideas can we move into and go into, rather than being stuck in things that don't work. I would argue you're still suffering from the jet lag of having been indoctrinated into accepting bad theses, but the impulse and inclination is there for something new. Okay, you would argue that, and I would agree. Intuitively, you know that the answers you're looking for have not been molded together yet. I agree. And I have a contempt for elitist status jerking or vague abstractions that sound sophisticated metaphysically but have no practical purpose, which really come from a place of having read too much reactionary thought that was neither beneficial to you or to political theory or the future development of man. I disagree with that. The idea that we recognize that elites have power is not elite status jerking. And the fact that you're opposed to that probably means you've read too much communist literature, too much egalitarian literature. Fundamentally, I see it as not being true to reality and not being true to oneself. You admit yourself that elites now push a culture of death for population culling, or because we are no longer fit for purpose, or whatever reasons you can provide to explain that away. Well, I promote a population culling. I think there are too many people. So that's my position as a non-elite. The Marxian dialectic of class struggle is already implicit there, so I guess you're a Marxist. I see more power in the moral narrative in some paranoid schizophrenic like Alex Jones than I see in shabby conformism or even fatalism on your part. So the fact that you think a paranoid schizophrenic like Alex Jones is superior than to me, just because I'm realistic about the fatalism or the inability of like your whatever weird Marxist ideology you follow, the inability for that to actually have true power, and the way in which it's always appropriated by larger powers. So my realism about that, you think, is just a shabby conformism, and you think Alex Jones is a superior thinker. I see. You think he's a more powerful thinker. And certainly he does have a larger audience. My question would be, having that larger audience, is that more impactful than having a smaller, higher quality audience? I guess we'll see in the long run. But I think ultimately when you look at, like a Father Coughlin type was the Alex Jones of his day, and he really ultimately did not impact history in the same way that, Jacob Schiff did, or some of the key players in America's move toward imperialism. In short, I'm accusing you of being overly generous to the current crop, and it isn't simply some envious lowbrow populism which drives me, even though that's what it sounds like, given your support of Alex Jones, but a genuine, wholehearted religious conviction that the Rousseau-inspired vision of the future being guided by the plain man or the dumb lower classes is in fact a brighter one. So I just disagree with you. And I don't think I've ever believed that my whole life. I don't think I've ever believed that Rousseau and a future being guided by the plain, dumb lower classes is a bright future. So you sound like a Christian Marxist to me, and I just disagree with you. So I told Hengist, I said here, Hengist, if you want to have a public conversation, I'm just trying not to forget everything. I said, Hengist, if you want to have a public conversation, DM me with your availability. We can set something up. He never DM me. He doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want to have a conversation. So he just wants to throw accusations as if they're like big owns of me. Like, oh, I know exactly what you're about. I'm going to psychoanalyze you, which sort of falls flat from my perspective. And then he supports the plain man, the dumb lower classes. and he supports Rousseau. I mean, who's more like Rousseau, Hangus? Is it me who does 5-hour live streams, or is it you who, does basically a Marxist Christian psychoanalysis, and a pretty poor one, and then you just run away, and then you don't even respond. You don't even say like, "Hey, I'll get back to you later. I'm busy." You just ignore it. So that's the Hangus saga. We'll see if we can provoke him into a conversation. We want to fight. We want to have blood sports on the channel, right? So the Discord is there for people who want to challenge me. Let's see. We've got in the good foods to eat section. We're doing a review. This is the first public review of the Discord. The Discord is public. Everything you post in the Discord will be public. Just in case you didn't read the rules. Dietary cholesterol does not equal blood cholesterol. Okay, I don't know what that means or what the implication is supposed to be there. But we've got Faust is saying some certain things. But I think that's all. I think we really have to get going here. So we're going to finish up the chat. Let's go to good foods. I'm listening on Bluetooth and it was effing loud. Am I shouting too loud for you? You got to turn down the Oh, the alarm was too loud. Well, I apologize. I should just keep track of time better. Have you seen EBL? I've seen some episodes of EBL. There's one this weekend with Richard, Joe FC, and T Hamster about Carl Schmidt. Yeah, some of the EBLs have been a little bit funny. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the EBL. EBL is good. People like EBL. Daring topic there, Mr. Brown. Yeah. But it has to be said. We have to... Is your criticism of GN Moldbug due to anti-Semitism? No. No, of course not, Hector. That, of course, is not my criticism. My criticism of GA is like, GA is essentially set up in a way as to make it obscure. And when I look at the main, like when I try to reduce it to its principles, it's advocating for formalism, which I disagree with. Like, so I disagree with GA on the formalist aspect. I'm not really interested in Gans. Like, I'm not super interested in going into it because I think, for me, my area of study, like what's apparent to me as something interesting, what's apparent to me as something that we should be invested in and researching is not necessarily GA right now. I think there are other things, like we should be reading the Quran, for example. So there's just a lot of time investment that you need to make to like fully understand the system of GA. And that's not an investment I'm willing to make based on like what I'm seeing. Like there are many, like there's Theosophy, there's all kinds of different complicated, like the works of Rudolf Steiner, there's like the Alawite, there's like Sufism, like there's just so many systems out there. Like we have to choose who we're going to pay attention to, and paying attention to GA, I view is not a good use of my time. For Moldbug, I think Moldbug put ideas forth in an obscure way, and that people like Nick Land followed up and they kind of made those ideas a little more apparent and then took them to their logical conclusions. So I think Moldbug was a starting point, but I don't really recommend anyone go back and read Moldbug because I haven't done that. Because I think if you read the follow-ups to Moldbug and people who are influenced by Moldbug, you're going to gain more out of that than reading the OG Moldbug. FZ is Bay. I agree with your balance of power analysis. My point is that the imperial power has to pay the client states to do their bidding. The price of paying Israel versus Saudi Arabia is different. We pay more direct and indirect, cultural, political to Israel versus Saudi Arabia. So people are complaining about the cost of the imperial relationship. Okay, I mean, there's, I don't know. I don't know what the argument here exactly is, the price of paying these different people. I think maybe you need to do a longer form and we need to break this down point by point. So like I said, if you want to, because this is coming to an end because I can't stop here. We've already done 2.5 hours, so I'm just ending this now. I'm sorry I have time constraints. I just want to get through the chat. So, Torin, if you want to have a discussion about this, message me. We can have a longer discussion. Re-listen when it's done. Mix too much of the context. So you can literally just drag the bar on the bottom of the YouTube video on the live stream to the beginning and re-watch it while the stream is going. You don't have to wait till it's done. Folks trying to drag our king. He's undraggable. Have you heard Elon Musk's new single? Nope, you should have stand. It's fire, feeling so inspired. I can't join this Discord link, yeah, because there's only 5 invites allowed. So it looks like we've reached the max of the 5 invites. Could be a new intro track to the channel, not if it's copyrighted. Most people were Marxists as part of their intellectual journey when they're 19. Most edgy conspiracy theorists aren't too far off from mild paranoid schizophrenia. Social media outrage and hysteria also remind me of Alex Jones's schizophrenia. Time cannot be stopped. There's absolutely no way back. No wise renunciation to be made. Only dreamers believe in ways out. Optimism is cowardice. Hashtag Spangler. Kenneth the Fed talking you into posting videos of yourself and joining his Discord. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's why it's a voluntary thing, and it's a public thing. I do have to ban a word that Hector is using, though, because it's not an okay word to use. Just you know that the word is censored, and you're trying to get around the censor. But it's not okay to take someone's sexual identity and to make it into an insult. It's not okay. I won't stand for this. It's not permissible on this channel. You aren't allowed to use... I mean, I learned this when I was like 14. I learned that you are not allowed to use people's sexual identity as an insult. Grooming much. The Discord link has expired. Can I get another? Well, you're just going to have to check in for the next stream, I suppose. Why do you disagree with formalism? Because I think hiding your power is an effective strategy. So I don't see any reason for the elite to disarm themselves and just allow people to know who they are. And the argument of how you get from A to B there via a military dictatorship, I think just results in Charlie Kirkism, which I don't think is going to be a formalist structure at the end of the day. I think for like the analysis of formalism where you recognize that power is not what it appears to be is useful, but the idea that we should therefore force power to become explicit, I don't see how you get to that point. You keep making videos on things I want to as well. Theosophy and Tripart Society are on my list too. Well, you got to be faster, Faust. You got to be faster. Maybe you should start fasting. You should start fasting. If you want to go fast, you got to fast. Literally, I haven't eaten anything today and I feel great. I'm on fire right now. I pretty much eat all my calories at the end of the day. That's how I remain spry. It's a beautiful thing. I'm telling you, fasting... The other part of the Christian equation is prayer. They say fasting and prayer are the 2 things you need. Prayer is a bit complicated. That's sort of a video of its own. I'm not praying to God very often. Maybe I would benefit from praying to God a little bit more. But definitely the fasting thing, very powerful. Definitely something that I advocate for. That's your health tip for the day, Faust. Who do you want to win the Australian Open? Djokovic or Thiem? I don't know Thiem. So I guess my default would be Djokovic because I don't know who Thiem is. Let's make Michael Pemoulis a mod so he can do... I wish mods could post images in the YouTube chat so then I could take a look at who Thiem is. Dominic Thiem is an Australian. I'm looking at some of the pictures of him. He kind of looks like Djokovic in a way, and so, I don't know, some of these pictures here. Dominic Thiem, he was born in Vienna, so he is a German. Are we going to support the German or the Serb? I don't know. Let's see his wife, Kristina Mladenovic. Oh boy, Kristina Mladenovic. I don't know. Kristina Mladenovic, and then we compare Djokovic wife. Djokovic wife. we're gonna. I mean, Djokovic. He's so dolichocephalic. He's such a dolichocephalic man, and his wife. You know, you got Djokovic wives. I feel like has a little more neoteny, and then we've got this team's wife is much more robust. I think team's wife could probably beat up Djokovic wife, but Djokovic wife is cuter than team's wife. So it's kind of, are you going for the cute waifu, or are you going for the strong, robust waifu who's going to bear you many strong sons? I think we might have to go with team for this one. But maybe more evidence is required. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that. Get back to this. Man, that is so distracting, the tennis stuff. Steiner is a big influence on the Dutch schools. We have the Fria school here. Rooting for team, but it's an uphill battle. Coincidentally, I picked him to win before the tournament started. I wanted Joker because I want the big three to have the same number of majors. It's amazing to me that like 10 years ago, it was Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, and Federer. And today, it's still like, who are the top three? Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, Federer. Like, they've had this lasting power that you don't often see in other sports, where everything switches around like every couple of years. The rivalry heats up, but do you remain strong, powerful, spry? Well, Faust, you're definitely a big, strong guy. You could probably pick me up and throw me, but I'm just winning the stream game. So it's warrior versus priest here, and I think the priest is winning. What? Mod? Yeah, you're now a mod. Say a little prayer for you, Kenny, so you don't have to. I appreciate that. Cool mug. Austrian, not Austrian, not Australian. Okay, I misread that. Australian. Everyone remember to keep Ken in your prayers. Oh, thank you, Staff of Ra. I don't even pray for myself. Yeah, I don't do a whole lot of prayer, to be honest. I think Team's wife might be a pro tennis player herself. True, it's hard for me to do fasting right now because of a medical condition. What should I just do? Just push through and sacrifice myself for the sake of the ideal? I don't know your specific medical condition, Hector, so I can't give you medical advice. You're going to have to talk to a doctor for that. Man, the stream is really heating up here. We got to 37 viewers, and I'm about to end it. This is very sad. If I had more time, it would be a nice 5-hour stream, because people like the topic. I understand it's a popular topic. It's a controversial topic, but we're almost at the end of the chart. Having a cute wife and a strong wife, so Staff of Raw advocating for polygamy there. They are lasting because tennis is much more skill compared to pure athleticism. True. A very principled sport. The warrior caste. Yeah, we'll see, Faust. We'll see in the end if your warrior diet beats my priestly diet. We'll see who wins the stream game. Not very Faustian. Please approve me in Discord. Well, I'm sorry. I've been trying to read the chat. I haven't been taking a look at this. Sky Ostrich. Ah, okay, Sky Ostrich. All right. I didn't know you were Staff of Ra, Sky Ostrich. Man, all these people have different names. It's so confusing. Can you just pick one weird name? Sky Ostrich, I am now making you a rule respecter, so please respect the rules. Pay piety toward the rules at all times. Okay. I don't know what corona is. You're going to have to explain that. Is that coronavirus? Ah, now I understand. I'm sorry. I'm not very smart. Also, I forgot that I just kept the Discord thing up, so I accidentally revealed a private message that was totally inconsequential and didn't mean anything. So that's good, but that's the danger when you do this screen capture thing. You start revealing things in the chat in this live stream. So you got to be careful about that. We're gonna slip up one day. There's gonna be some weird stuff on the stream, but it's gonna happen. But you're just gonna have to stick around and check it out. I seriously had a dream about having 2 wives. There was a huge bear trying to kill me. Well, I'm sorry to hear about that. I fast often. The app is literally called Discord. It creates Discord past me with that. Yeah, I understand. The only reason I have it is so that people can eventually come on the show and we can have debates. That's the purpose of the Discord. But in itself, it's not something anyone should spend too much time on. I agree. I've criticized it before, and my criticisms remain true. Good night, and bleep, bleep, bleep. Well, we can't say that. You should have seen this Tennis Sangren versus Roger. It was a heartbreaker. Sometimes a pot of tea during the day. He has 7 match points against Roger. Could not seal the deal. People who fast come across as very full of themselves and probably should STFU. Thank you, Hector. I'm just reporting the authentic health benefits of fasting. And I'm sorry you have a medical condition. Hello, this is a good stream. Hello, this is a good stream. Can you install a special user tier for me in the Discord called Golden Boy? We'll see about special ranks. Special ranks, we only have like 24 people in the Discord right now, so maybe once things get a little bit chaotic, we'll have some special ranks. Everyone should go to Justin Murphy's latest video, upvote the Randy Lentz comment. I don't know what that is. Discord chat for gamers. Yeah, we are all gamers here, I suppose. Gamers on Discord. Let's check out Justin. I think he did a stream with, who was that? He was some guy, some very dolichocephalic guy. Charlie Looker, who was a good looker. 2853. Wait, what's going on at 28?
Shit that are coming.
Presumably,
it's more of a. It's also just what connections they have, and do they know the new blogs and shit that are coming out that I don't know about yet because I don't sit around following all the latest thing, but they know the latest new thing that's actually has more weird shit than you think. But I don't know how that works in publishing, man. I really have no idea. I mean, the thing is, I know that like self-releasing an album with or without PR, there's like a long time-honored tradition and like dignity in doing that. You know what I mean? Punk was that, is that.
Okay, so you said 2053.
Do they know the and she just couldn't pull shit. And now I know publicists who could have made it fucking soar, and I'm just like, God damn it, so.
Right. So you got to get someone who gets what you're doing and can really talk about it, presumably.
It's more of a, it really is also just what connections they have, and do they know the new blogs and shit that are coming out that I don't know about yet because I don't sit around following all the latest thing, but they know the latest new thing that's actually has more fun.
Okay, I don't understand what exactly the Randy Lentz comment is about. I would enjoy a link to the Discord. You're going to have to check in on the next stream because I'm not letting everybody into the Discord all at once because I don't want the Discord to get out of hand. I want the Discord to be under something tight. And I will tell Pete, I haven't banned Pete because Pete has been a promoter of the channel, but if you look at the rules here, the rules say no white nationalism or ethnostatism or alt-right. I can't even say those words because it's going to get me striked on YouTube, but I just did. So anyway, I said, please don't post that type of content in the Discord, and Pete has been posting some borderline content. If we could keep that out, literally, those types of people have their own places. I'm not looking to cultivate that kind of political material in my Discord. Just to put that out there, just to throw that out there. So as the Discord, if it gets bigger, I will be cracking down on that sort of thing. So I don't want to allow a bunch of people into the Discord all at once because it's going to get it harder for me to cultivate the kind of thing that I'm looking to have. Ultimately, what I would really like if just no one ever posted anything in the Discord. That would be the best of all worlds, but it is a weird. Kenneth purports to like concealed power, but acts with a fierce boot. Just shows I'm not elite enough. Vegans have the best dietary outcomes. Gaming is degenerate. Watch Game Changers on Netflix and the ensuing debate on Joe Rogan. Maybe you should just tell me what it's about, because I'm not going to do it. The implication is that you are the new thing that is coming out that he doesn't know about. I think he does know about me. I think he's mentioned me. Disgusting cussing, millennial leftists. Yeah, I don't approve of cussing. If we could get the cussing out of here. Arguing with an anti-vegan is like arguing with a Christian fundamentalist. Okay, well, did you know that a lot of Christians are vegans and that a lot of Christian monks advocated for veganism? Discord is the replacement for Ventrilo and other previous older VoIP communication programs used primarily for gamers for team-based game comms. Potty mouths veganism is malnutrition. My brother went vegan, nearly killed himself, died of cancer anyway. Epitome of malnourishment. I'm sure that was causative. Joke is that wherever Hector goes, it just has to be a debate about veganism. That's just always what it comes back to. It's like the law where it's like every political debate, eventually you start talking about Hitler. With Hector, it doesn't matter what the conversation is about, it's always going to go back to veganism at some point. Joke is that Pete is considered a disloyal type in the Dutch nationalist community. Ah, interesting. So the inner drama of the Dutch nationalist community is playing out here on the channel. Vegans have lower rates of cancer. Pseudo-Muslim, the big birds want in the Discord, invite us. I'm giving out 5 invites per episode. No more, no less. So you're just gonna have to wait your turn. You're just gonna have to keep checking in. It's like I'm throwing out cash and you have to kind of scramble for the cash on the ground. That's sort of what's going on. Veganism ruins fertility. Comparing vegans to people eating standard American. Okay, is there a way that I can just ban the term vegan and veganism? I'm not interested in this. They should eat some eggs. They can produce testosterone. Vegans are down. Okay, on that, I'm just gonna end. I'm gonna end the stream because I'm tired of the vegan debate. It's not interesting to me. We're done here. Goodbye. Hope you enjoyed the stream. I'm not going to read any more comments about veganism. I'm done. I'm gone. I got to leave. I got to go. I got to rush. I'm behind schedule. Longest living popular. We're not going to read that. We're not going to read these comments. The stream is ending. Goodbye, everyone. Hope you had a great time. Hope this was a fun stream on American-Israeli geopolitics and the Middle East, and hope everyone is having a great time. I'll check in next time. We will read a little bit more Quran, and we will talk about other topics. We'll talk about feminism in the future. It's going to be a great time. Yeah, we're creating artificial scarcity. It's going to be awesome. So, see ya. Bye-bye.